Chapter 1917. Dan Xiaoqian's confusion. If this notice was released, his dignity would be completely crushed, and he would never be able to raise his head in public ever again. He would become the talk of the entire town, and this shame would effectively destroy the prestige that the Dan clan had built up over several centuries. It would be thorough social suicide. Sign the document, Xueqin said with a cold and pressurizing voice. Third young master, you mustn't sign the document. Once you do, the reputation of our Dan clan will be in shambles. Elder Yi had also read the document from behind Dan Xiaoqian, and he immediately kneeled down and cried in protest. Even death was not as fearsome as seeing the clan that he had devoted his life to serving humiliated in such a manner. Dan Xiaoqian was at a loss. He knew very well what would happen if he signed the document, but if he did not, the other party would still back out of the marriage agreement, and the outcome would likely be much worse than this. He was already backed to a corner. There was nothing else he could do. At that moment, even suicide had become an option for him. He had never desired so much to end his life and let all of this come to an end. However, when all seemed lost, a voice suddenly echoed in the air. If you don't wish to sign the document, don't sign it. Everyone immediately turned around, only to see a young man wrapped like a mummy leaning against the doorframe. He was looking at them with a smile on his lips. This young man did not seem to possess any cultivation at all, but his eyes were completely devoid of fear despite standing before an expert of Xueqian's caliber. It was as if everything that was happening before him was nothing more than a small scuffle. Who are you? If this matter doesn't concern you, you will do well to keep your mouth zipped. Haven't you heard of the saying that disaster originates from the mouth? Xueqian glared at Zhongxian threateningly. If possible, they wanted to resolve the matter with Dan Xiaoqian without resorting to violence, or else there was a risk that word could get out. Thus, Xueqian had no choice but to hold himself back from making a move. With an unfazed smile, Zhongxian said, I am just an insignificant figure whom Brother Dan has saved. I didn't want to interfere in your business, but I was afraid that Brother Dan would regret his decision if he signed that document, so I couldn't help but advise him so. Brother Zhong. Dan Xiaoqian's eyes could not help but light up in gratitude. Even if Zhongxian did not know of Xueqin and Xueqian's true identity and the tremendous power that they wielded, it should be apparent that those two were figures that could not be trifled with from their conversation. Yet, despite the risk of possibly bringing trouble upon himself, the other party still chose to speak up. Such sentiments left him feeling slightly touched. Regret. Ha ha ha. What kind of regret could he possibly have? Does this brat still think that it's possible for him to get together with the second young mistress? Xueqian scoffed. Snap out of your daydream. Why don't you take a good look at yourself first? A toad like you actually dares to lust for the flesh of a swan? Learn your place. I'm glad to see that there's at least one thing the both of us can agree on. The two of them indeed shouldn't get together. Zhongxian nodded calmly in response to the other party's insults. It's apparent that this second young mistress of yours isn't worthy of Brother Dan. There couldn't be a worse insult to him than if he married someone like her. What did you say? Xueqian had been nodding gleefully when Zhongxian spoke the first part of his piece. However, by the time Zhongxian finished his words, Xueqian's eyes were already dripping with murderous intent. You don't believe me? Zhongxian looked at Xueqian with an incredulous expression, as if he was unable to believe that the latter could not understand something so obvious. I guess you really have to see with your own eyes in order to tell the obvious, huh? Very well, come back in 3 days, and we'll see the result. After all that was said and done, it seems like you are just trying to stall for time. Futile. Xueqian sneered coldly. As long as Dan Xiaoqian doesn't sign this document, I can assure that what he will lose isn't just his dignity but his life as well. Zhongxian shrugged nonchalantly and said, if it's gone, so be it. Someone like Brother Dan wouldn't care about something as trivial as that. Somehow, Dan Xiaoqian felt that there was something very wrong with the words that had just been spoken. It seems like Brother Zhong is a person with extremely strong opinions. But what do you mean by if it's gone, so be it? This isn't a trivial matter at all. My life is on the line here. Turning his gaze away from Zhongxian, Xueqian looked at Dan Xiaoqian with a look so cold that it seemed like it could freeze hell over. Is that your decision? Dan Xiaotian shuddered a little under Xue Chen's glare, but he gritted his teeth and replied, Brother Zhong's words reflect my intention. He had no idea why Brother Zhong would put so much hope in him, but it was clear that he had no path of retreat anymore. If he had to weigh the dignity of the Dan clan to his own life, he would indubitably choose the dignity of the Dan clan. The Dan clan did not belong to him only, it had been built up with the effort of his predecessors, including his deceased grandfather, father, and brothers. He could not trample on their efforts just so he could live. Besides, once the marriage agreement was annulled, he would be as good as dead anyway. With this, the decision that he had to make could not be any clearer. You do have some backbone, don't you? Let's see where your decision brings you, shall we? Hearing Dan Xiaotian's final decision, Xue Chen flung his sleeves furiously. He turned to the young lady beside him and said, Second young mistress, let's go. On the other hand, Xue Qin looked at Dan Xiaotian disdainfully and spat, Humph. I hope that you won't come begging for your life when the time comes. Following which, she turned around and walked away. Throughout this entire period, she did not even spare a glance at Zhongxian, as if it would sully her eyes to look at an ordinary human. As soon as the two of them were out of the courtyard, Teacher. Xue Qin looked at Xue Chen worriedly. Xue Chen quickly scanned his surroundings to confirm that there was no one around before reassuring the young lady. Don't worry. We won't even require 3 days to resolve this problem. The Dan clan is nothing at all. Let's see if they can even survive tonight. Those words made Xue Qin heave a sigh of relief. I had a good impression of him initially, but who could have known that he would turn out to be such an arrogant brat? Let him die then. A person like him doesn't deserve to live in this world. The two of them got into a carriage, and it did not take them long to disappear into the distance. Shortly after Xue Qin and Xue Chen left the residence, there was a brief moment of silence before Elder Yi spoke up worriedly. Third young master, this won't do. We can't just blindly wait here for our deaths. Let's leave the city. He knew that the city lord manor was not as gracious and magnanimous as it seemed on the surface. In fact, he suspected that the massacre and eventual downfall of the Dan clan had been orchestrated by the city lord manor. Since they were willing to go that far, it was likely that they would have no qualms dispatching assassins against Dan Xiaotian, especially after his decisive rejection earlier. Furthermore, with the means of the city lord manor, it was likely that they would be able to erase all traces of their involvement. Since that was the case, the best thing they could do was run as far away as they could. Run away? Do you think that it's still possible for us to run away? Dan Xiaotian shook his head bitterly. The fact that the second young mistress had come personally to reject the marriage showed their determination in ensuring that this matter was resolved without a hiccup. As such, there was no way the city lord manor would allow them to escape. If they could not cancel the marriage agreement, would the second young mistress not have to spend her entire life in loneliness, waiting for him to come back? Brother Zhong. Dan Xiaotian turned to Zhongxian, hoping to ask the latter for some guidance as to what he should do in this situation. Since the other party had made huge promises such as come back in 3 days, and we'll see the results, perhaps the other party already had an idea in mind. I'd like to confirm your intentions one last time. Were you willing to sign that earlier document? Of course not. Dan Xiaotian shook his head. If I signed that darned paper, how could I face my predecessors even after my death? If he sullied the Dan clan's reputation like that, even his death would not be enough to atone for his sins. Are you afraid of pain? Zhongxian asked. Even death is no longer that frightening to me, so what does a little pain matter? Dan Xiaotian had no idea what Zhongxian was getting at, but he still answered the question honestly. Do you wish to exact vengeance for the humiliation you have suffered today? Of course. It isn't just today's humiliation. If I could, I would exact vengeance for all of the insults I have suffered ever since my parents' death, but... Dan Xiaotian looked at his own leg with a crestfallen look. How could he possibly feel nothing when being insulted in such a manner? But with his leg in such state and his inability to cultivate, such intentions would only remain intentions in his head. They would never come to fruition. If he had still been that talented youth, he would not have to live his life so subserviently. Good. Since you have made up your mind, The last thing you have to do now is acknowledge me as your teacher, Zhong Xian said. Acknowledge you as my teacher? Did Brother Zhong's head bump on something that resulted in a concussion? What am I supposed to learn from an ordinary human? Could it be that your promise of come back in 3 days referred to this? Dan Xiaoqian's lips twitched as he suddenly felt as if he had been bamboozled. Chapter 1918 GU Dan Xiaoqian wasn't the only one who was bewildered by Zhong Xian's proposal. Even Elder Yi was taken aback. With twitching lips, Elder Yi said, Master Zhong, this is a very serious matter here. Pardon me, but I'll have to ask you not to mess around. Their lives were at stake, but the other party was still in the mood to make jokes. If he had known that this fellow was so unreliable, he never would have allowed the third young master to save him and bring him back. Looking at the expressions on their faces, Zhong Xian could tell that they doubted his abilities. Thus, he placed his hands behind his back with the intention of displaying the disposition of a true expert, but his movements only ended up tugging on his wounds, causing his lips to twitch hideously as a result. He had to wheeze a little before he managed to suppress the pain and proceed with his expert disguise. You injured your meridians back when you were younger, causing your body to be unable to drive zhenqi. At the same time, your dantian was also damaged, so you are unable to store any energy. As a result, you are unable to cultivate at all. Is my analysis right? Dan Xiaoqian nodded in response. He had been 6 when that incident happened to the Dan clan, shattering his dantian and meridians. He had been unable to recover his dantian and meridians since then, so even though he spent every single passing day practicing his swordsmanship, he was unable to infuse zhenqi into his swordsmanship. In other words, his moves carried only the form but not the true essence behind them. He had consulted many physicians regarding his condition, but none of them had been able to cure him. In the end, he had given up and resigned himself to it. Then, do you know what the cause of the injury to your dantian and meridians is? Zhong Xian asked. Some kind of powerful zhenqi has slipped into my body, inflicting devastating damage all around. It's already a blessing that I'm still alive now, Dan Xiaoqian replied. This was the diagnosis given to him by most of the physicians that he had met. Zhenqi. Zhong Xian shook his head. If it was the result of another cultivator's zhenqi lingering in your body, considering how diligently you cultivate each day in hopes of improving your own condition, do you think that it's possible for you not to show the slightest improvement after so many years? That question left Dan Xiaoqian stumped. That was also what had left him bewildered too. For 10 years, he had met all kinds of famous physicians, and he had tried many different types of treatment, be it medicinal essence, pills, acupuncture, medicinal baths. None of them had worked. His body was like a tattered gunny sack. Any spiritual energy that he absorbed would eventually dissipate, making him unable to advance his cultivation. Many famed physicians had told him that it was the result of hostile zhenqi lingering within his body, undoing all of his efforts. They had assured him that their treatment would work, but none of them had been effective. With time, those physicians had eventually deemed him to be incurable and given up on him. Dan Xiaoqian pondered for a moment before asking Zhong Xian, if it's not the result of hostile lingering zhenqi in my body, what else could possibly be destroying my meridians and dantian and yet not cause my death? What was truly bizarre about his condition was that, aside from his inability to cultivate, it did not affect any other aspect of his life. Xue Qin claimed that he was unable to carry out the responsibilities of a husband, but that could not have been more incorrect. He knew better than anyone that he would wake up with a majestic pillar that rose high into the heavens every morning. It's a GU, Zhong Xian stated. Someone has planted a GU in you, which has resulted in all sorts of treatments being ineffective on you. GU. Dan Xiaoqian was stunned. Are you saying that there's a worm living in my body? It isn't just living, it has been absorbing all of the energy you have cultivated over the years, so it has already become extremely powerful. Zhong Xian added. Through the Library of Heaven's Path, he was able to locate the core of Dan Xiaoqian's problem in an instant. The reason his dantian and his meridians had been refusing to recover over the years despite his efforts was because someone had planted a GU in him. This GU would relentlessly devour all of the energy that he cultivated, and this was the source of his cultivation failing to inch forward at all over the past 10 years. A living worm actually exists inside of me. Dan Xiaotian turned to look at Elder Yi with a deep frown, and the latter contemplated deeply for a brief moment before shaking his head. What they had just heard was simply so unbelievable that they could hardly swallow it. If there was really a GU in his body, and it had been in his body for the past 10 years, how could the many physicians that they had consulted previously possibly be oblivious to it? And how could the young man tell? I can sense some reservations from you too, and I can understand why. However, I do have a way to prove the matter though. Zhong Xian could tell from the expressions of those two that they did not believe what he was saying, but it was not a problem to him. Do you have a silver needle or the like here? Elder Yi nodded. He walked into the room, and it did not take long for him to return with a box of silver needles. Here you go. As the saying goes, those who are constantly plagued by afflictions eventually become doctors themselves. They had tried out all sorts of remedies over the past 10 years, such that most fundamental medicinal equipment could be found in their residence. UN. Have a good look. I'll catch it out right now. With a light chuckle, Zhong Xian grabbed the silver needles and flicked them forward. Ding-ling. All of the needles fell onto the floor 3 meters away from him. Cough cough. I don't really have too much strength right now, so I need you to come closer to me, Zhong Xian said awkwardly. He was so used to flicking needles from a distance that he had forgotten that he was still unable to use his zhenqi, which severely limited what he could do. All right. While Dan Xiaotian felt that Zhong Xian was not really a reliable person, after a moment of hesitation, he still made his way over. Since the situation was already like that, he might as well go along with it. There was nothing to be lost. Taking out a couple of silver needles once more, Zhong Xian took a deep breath as he invoked the library of Heaven's Path once more. After which, he pierced the silver needles according to the positions stated in Dan Xiaotian's book. Ding! Another unexpected hiccup happened that caused Zhong Xian's face to redden. In his current weak state, he was actually unable to pierce the silver needle through Dan Xiaotian's skin. While Dan Xiaotian was unable to cultivate anymore, his cultivation was still at Saint 6 Dan. Furthermore, his constitution had been nourished by the mercury-like spiritual energy over the years, making his physical body even tougher than steel. While Zhong Xian was able to move his body around, he was still feeble from the damage that he had sustained. He could not even gather enough strength from his body to pierce through Dan Xiaotian's skin. Help me with this. Zhong Xian looked at Elder Yi and beckoned him over. Elder Yi quickly walked over. With a tap of his finger, a surge of zhenqi flowed through the silver needle, and the silver needle straightened once more. Su. The tip went right into Dan Xiaotian's body. Peng. Zhong Xian was just about to control the silver needle when the silver needle suddenly flew out at an even faster speed, piercing right into the wall. Dan Xiaotian and Elder Yi widened their eyes incredulously, especially the former. As the person receiving the acupuncture, he knew that he did not exert any force, but the silver needles still flew out at such a swift speed. Could it be that there was really some other being existing in his body? You should have felt it. It was the GU in your body that pushed it out, Zhong Xian explained. To be honest, he did not have the means to kill the GU in his current state. Nevertheless, by bringing Dan Xiaotian's attention to the existence of the GU, he should be able to win the young man's trust. With sufficient time, he was confident that he would be able to resolve this problem once he recovered his strength. There really is a GU in my body. Dan Xiaotian could not speak another word. A moment ago, he had been confident that there was no way such a vile thing would be in his body, but what he had just witnessed had caused his confidence to waver. Putting aside the fact that he had not exerted any force, even if he did not have the ability to jolt the needle right into the wall. While the earlier needle did not harm the GU at all, it showed that we are aware of its current location. So, it's likely that the GU will move to another location before settling down. While it's moving, you will be able to drive your zhenqi, and your crippled left leg will recover for a brief period of time, Zhong Xian said. However, this recovery is temporary. Once it settles down, everything will go back to as it was. The only way you can resolve this situation once and for all is to kill it. Is that so? Dan Xiaotian was still a little dazed by the happenings. A few moments passed, and his eyes suddenly widened in disbelief. Just as Zhongxian had said earlier, he could feel Junqi flowing through his body once more. Not only so, feeling had returned to his numb left leg as well. He tried taking a few steps, and his movements were no different from those of an ordinary person. There was not the slightest difficulty. However, the feeling in his left leg only remained for 10 breaths before turning as numb as a block of wood. Knowing that there was nothing wrong with his diagnosis, Zhongxian said with a light chuckle, "You should be able to trust me now, right?" Disciple Dan Xiaotian pays respect to teacher. Knowing that this was an invaluable opportunity for him to break out of his current state, he immediately got onto the ground and bowed down. Many renowned physicians had taken a look at his condition, but none of the treatments that they provided had made a difference to his condition at all. However, with just a glance from afar, Zhongxian was already able to identify the root of his problem and even demonstrate it to him. From this alone, it could be seen that the other party was a person of great capabilities, no matter how he might seem on the exterior. Rise. After Dan Xiaotian carried out a formal greeting to acknowledge Zhongxian as his teacher, Zhongxian quickly walked forward to help him up. To be honest, he had initially planned to steer clear from the affairs of the Azure as much as possible, focusing his efforts on finding Luo Ruoxin. However, Dan Xiaotian had saved him, so he wanted to return the favor. Having acknowledged Zhongxian as his teacher, Dan Xiaotian looked at the young man before him expectantly and asked, "Teacher, may I know how I can get rid of the GU in my body?" Just the thought of there being a worm crawling in his flesh and leeching off his body was more than enough to raise goosebumps on his arms. He had not been too affected by it in the past because he had not been aware of it, but at this rate, he would not even be able to sleep well at night as long as the GU remained. "I am able to remove the GU in your body, but I am too weak at the moment. I'll have to recover from my injuries before I can do anything about it," Zhongxian replied. If not for his severe wounds, just a blast of his heaven's path Junqi would decimate whatever GU was crawling in Dan Xiaotian's body in a breath. However, in his current state, he could not even exert his Junqi. As such, while he was able to identify where the GU was, he could not do a thing about it. More importantly, the GU even gleefully pushed his silver needle out, as if taunting his weakness. This was really testing the limits of his patience. "Recover from your injuries?" Dan Xiaotian echoed when he suddenly widened his eyes in realization. "Ah, I nearly forgot. I have a couple of valuable recovery medicine here, and I was planning to feed you some of them so that you could recover from your injuries. However, you've been in a coma for the past 3 days, and I didn't dare use them recklessly. Since you're already awake, allow me to bring those pills to you right now. Once the medicinal energy diffuses throughout your body, it shouldn't take too long for you to recover to your full strength." Most high-tier recovery medicine were incredibly potent, such that it required one to facilitate the assimilation of the medicinal energy using one's Junqi. If one recklessly fed it to an unconscious patient, there was a good chance that the powerful medicinal energy would end up harming the patient. As such, they had put off the matter till now. A few moments later, Elder Yi walked into the room with a jade bottle in hand. He uncorked the jade bottle, and the fragrant scent of herbs immediately drifted across the room. It was a grade 8 recovery pill. Zhongxian took out a pill and swallowed it without any hesitation. However, a moment later, he sighed deeply and said, "I'm afraid that the medicine you have isn't of much use to me." Despite Zhongxian's current seemingly powerless state, his core was still a Dimension Shatterer realm cultivator. While grade 8 recovery pills could be considered invaluable panacea for curing all sorts of wounds for a Saint 6 Dan cultivator, it did not even cause the slightest ripple in Zhongxian's body. "It isn't of much use to you." Dan Xiaotian quickly instructed Elder Yi to bring over the best recovery medicine that they had, but none of it turned out to be of use to Zhongxian. "Are there any large markets in this town where I can buy recovery pills or medicinal herbs?" Zhongxian asked with a deep frown. "There is a market, but the medicinal herbs and pills sold aren't too advanced. The pills that we have here are already the best on the market." Dan Xiaotian scratched his head. Considering how those pills were completely useless to the young man before him, it would be meaningless to buy more of them. "Is there any way to acquire higher tier pills?" Zhongxian asked. As long as he did not recover from his injuries, he would be unable to cure Dan Xiaotian. At this rate, they were simply too vulnerable. Putting aside surviving the third day, it was questionable whether they would be able to get through the night. Dan Xiaotian pondered for a moment before replying. Most cultivators purchase high-tier pills through the ethereal token. As long as the trade is successful, the items will be swiftly delivered. Ethereal token? Hearing that familiar name, Zhongshen nodded. Then, is there any way I can acquire an ethereal token? Chapter 1919. Don't you want to return the favor? This was the second time that he had heard of this artifact after entering the Azure. It seemed like the top echelon of the Azure revolved around this single artifact. Regardless of whether it was to acquire top-notch cultivation techniques or high-tier pills, one required an ethereal token. From the looks of it, they would not be able to get anywhere without an ethereal token. All Zhongshen needed was a sufficiently high-tier pill to temporarily stabilize his wounds so that he could absorb the mercury-like spiritual energy from the surroundings and convert it into heaven's path Shunqi. Once that happened, all of the problems would swiftly be resolved. He would be able to remove the GU from Dan Xiaotian's body and teach him swordsmanship, thus saving the young man from his current plight. The city we live in is simply too small, so there's no ethereal hall here. As such, there are no vendors selling the ethereal token. Dan Xiaotian frowned. Is there no other way to acquire it? Zhongshen asked. There is one way a person can get an ethereal token in our city, Dan Xiaotian said, but it's simply so difficult that it's no exaggeration to say that it's completely impossible. Back when the Hongyang market was first established, in order to draw more customers into its premises, the owner inscribed 10 difficult questions and created a list of prizes corresponding to each of the questions. As long as one is able to solve a question, one will be able to acquire the corresponding prize. It successfully drew huge crowds to the Hongyang market, and 9 of the questions have been solved thus far. The prize of the final question remaining is an ethereal token, and there are many people who are dying to lay their hands on it. However, due to the sheer difficulty of the question, it remains undeciphered to date. Bring me there, Zhongshen said. Even if there was a vendor selling ethereal token there, it was not as if he had the money required to purchase it. Of course, with his means, he should be able to make money quickly, but that would be a great deal of trouble. Thus, it would be best if he could acquire the ethereal token like that. Knowing that there was no other way around this matter, Dan Xiaotian nodded in agreement. As Zhongshen's injuries were simply too severe and even walking put huge strain on his body, they could only travel to the Hongyang market in a carriage. It took roughly 2 hours for them to finally arrive before a massive marketplace. Dan Xiaotian leaped out of the carriage before carefully supporting Zhongshen. Together, they headed to the wall where the 10 questions were inscribed. As a popular tourist attraction site, there was a huge crowd swarming in the vicinity. The possibility of being able to obtain an ethereal token for free was too great a temptation, so it was understandable that people wanted to give it a try. Sigh, it's wrong again. You have been here 10 times over the past 2 months, but you still haven't succeeded. Why do you just keep coming back to embarrass yourself time and time again? What's wrong with that? It's not as if I'm embarrassing you. Besides, you came here many more times than me. If it's that easy to solve this question, it wouldn't have remained undeciphered even after all these years. The crowd gradually thinned as challengers failed one after another. The system that verified the accuracy of the answer was rather similar to the wall of dilemma that he had encountered in the past. Basically, every answer provided would be evaluated on the spot to determine whether it was right or not. This was also why it attracted a huge crowd every day. Perhaps, one might just stumble upon the correct answer by luck. On the way here, Zhongshen had learned from his conversation with Dan Xiaotian exactly how valuable the ethereal token was. Every single token was so precious that even ancient sage experts would have difficulty forking out the money for one. Judging from Dan Xiaotian's depiction, it seemed like even if he could bring out everything in his storage ring and sell his possessions there, he still might not be able to afford one. At the same time, he gained a deeper understanding of the Azure. As those living in the Azure had lived their life amid the mercury-like spiritual energy, their constitutions were exceptionally resilient, surpassing even the otherworldly demons of the master-teacher continent. Just like his previous self, Most of them possessed the strength of a Saint 1 Dan at birth, and that would increase all the way to Saint 9 Dan when they finally matured as an adult. Someone like Dan Xiaotian, who was only at Saint 6 Dan despite already being on verge of adulthood, was deemed a weakling with no future ahead of him. For example, despite being of similar age to one another, his fiancée, Xue Qin, was already at great Sage 3 Dan consummation, making her one of the strongest experts in the city. The city they were in, Zhenjiang City, was not an extremely large city, such that ancient sages were the most powerful existences there. One thing of note was that it was under the jurisdiction of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, which explained why it was recruiting disciples in the region. The lord of Zhenjiang City was Xue Qin's father, Xue Yarou, and he was known to be the #1 expert within the city. That being said, his cultivation was only on the same level as Zhong Xian, Dimension Shatterer Realm Primary Stage. So, once Zhong Xian recovered his strength, there would be no one else in the city who would be able to pose a threat to him anymore. As such, he had decided to make this his first priority. Zhong Xian placed all of those thoughts to the back of his mind and raised his head to take a closer look at the wall not too far away. Let me see what kind of question has put so many at a loss, such that it remains unsolved even after so many years. Even if a nurturing yang pill is forged to the level of perfection, the yang energy that it harnesses is still so violent that it can't be controlled by the cultivator consuming it. It did not take Zhong Xian too long to finish looking through the question. The question was not too complex. Basically, it was prompting others to solve one of the key problems surrounding the nurturing yang pill via proposing feasible modifications to its forging process. The nurturing yang pill was one of the necessary cultivation resources for cultivators practicing yang cultivation techniques. It would fill them up with the vigor and drive required to further their cultivation. The pill formula was the work of an ingenious apothecary, capitalizing on the synergistic properties of many medicinal herbs in order to amplify the eventual medicinal energy deposited within the nurturing yang pill. However, the pill had a fatal flaw. After consuming the nurturing yang pill, due to the massive buildup of yang energy, cultivators would have to seek an avenue to vent their heat. Once they vented their heat, it would result in a huge loss of yang energy, which was extremely wasteful of the resource. This was a problem that many apothecaries had sought to resolve, but it still remained an issue. Improving an already ingenious pill formula was simply no easy feat. It was for this reason that no one had succeeded even after so many years. Nurturing yang pill? After reading the question, Zhong Xian tilted his head slightly in confusion. The master-teacher continent had all kinds of pills, and he boasted an understanding of countless of them due to the incredible number of books he had read. Yet, he had never heard of the nurturing yang pill before. Fortunately, perhaps in consideration that the general public would not have too much of an understanding of this pill, the other party had left behind a detailed pill formula and its forging process. Zhong Xian took those into the Library of Heaven's Path, compiling a book out of them. I see. Zhong Xian nodded. There were many differences between the medicinal herbs of the master-teacher continent and the Azure, so the pill formulas and forging processes varied greatly from one another. Luckily, the Library of Heaven's Path was still working perfectly. With a glance, all of the flaws and errors in the combination of medicinal herbs and the forging processes became apparent to him. Dan Xiaotian also noticed the smile on Zhong Xian's lips, and he could not help but ask out of curiosity, "Teacher, do you know of the solution to resolving this problem?" He had also looked into this matter for quite a while, but it was to no avail. Could his teacher really have an answer to the problem with just a single glance? "I do have an idea in mind." Zhong Xian confirmed Dan Xiaotian's thoughts. Dan Xiaotian widened his eyes in shock, and he hurriedly asked, "Then, how should the problem be resolved?" If we are just looking at this single issue, the solution isn't actually that complicated. In the pill formula of the nurturing yang pill, there's a medicinal herb known as inferno grass stem. The problem can be resolved by switching that medicinal herb with the spirit matriarch grass. Zhong Xian explained with a lowered voice. Spirit matriarch grass. Isn't that a yin attribute medicinal herb? Will we really be able to forge the nurturing yang pill if we add something like that? Dan Xiaotian was a little surprised by the answer. Due to his crippled condition, he had studied quite a lot regarding pills and medicine. The inferno grass stem was not the most potent medicinal herb in the pill formula, but it played an indispensable role in forming the ultimate product. He did not think that a pill could be formed if one swapped it for the spirit matriarch grass. On the contrary, the spirit matriarch grass would neutralize the yang energy, thus causing all of the medicinal energy to be cancelled out. Yin and yang exist as complements to one another. While the spirit matriarch grass is a yin attribute medicinal herb, it is able to serve as a medium to nourish and calm the medicinal properties of the key ingredient, crimson fire flower leaf. This will solve the problem without causing any depletion in the medicinal energy of the pill, Zhongxian explained. The complementary properties of yin and yang were common knowledge on the master-teacher continent, and it was a concept often used in pill formulas. Yet, to think that no one in Xinjiang City knew of this. From the looks of it, it seemed like despite the stronger average prowess of those in the Azure, in terms of the development of occupations, it was nowhere close to the master-teacher continent. On the master-teacher continent, Kongsha's ideals had been propagated for tens of thousands of years, encouraging the open sharing of knowledge and furthering of mankind's wisdom. In comparison, it was obvious that the Azure was severely lacking in comparison. Dan Xiaotian was perplexed. He was just about to ask about the matter when he heard some chatters behind him. Following which, he saw the crowd around the wall opening up a pathway for a group of people. Who are they? They seem to be quite lofty. A middle-aged man amid the crowd asked in displeasure. Don't speak nonsense. A knowledgeable soul hurriedly hushed that middle-aged man up. Those are the experts from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion who are here to recruit menial disciples. Do you see that man in the middle? It's said that he has a deep understanding of pill forging. They are the experts from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion? The face of the middle-aged man who had spoken earlier paled in fright. He hurriedly backed off to the sides to allow the approaching group to pass through. The Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion commanded great prestige in Xinjiang City, and no one would dare challenge their authority there. At the same time, Zhongxian turned to take a closer look. The person standing at the forefront of the group was a cold-faced young man, probably in his mid-20s. He was dressed in a grey robe, and there was a sword tied to his waist. His eyes flickered with a hint of rational coolness, giving the impression of a person who would never let his feelings get in the way of his decisiveness. Despite his young age, the young man's cultivation was impressive, reaching ancient sage 4-dan dimension Shatterer realm. There was no such expert on the master-teacher continent, but it felt like it was not too rare to see cultivators of such a level here at all. The Azure Shore was a frightening place. While Zhongxian was assessing the young man, he could not help but notice that Dan Xiaotian's body had tensed up along with the arrival of the group. Glancing over, he saw that the latter's fists were tightly clenched. Tracing the latter's line of sight, he saw Xueqin, the young lady who had dropped by the Dan clan earlier to coerce Dan Xiaotian into backing out of the marriage agreement, walking right behind the grey-robed young man. She wore a tight purple dress that shaped out her proud figure beautifully, and its low neckline revealed her fair-colored neck. Her head was tilted upward slightly, and she emanated an aura of pride and loftiness. The fact that she was allowed to follow the experts of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion around was more than enough to show that she had already been confirmed as a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, and for a small place like Xinjiang City, it could indeed be considered an impressive feat such a problem actually stumped you all for so long, the grey-robed young man remarked as he swiftly read through the problem on the wall. He gestured to the young man behind him and said, "Write down the answer for me. Change the inferno grass stem to spirit matriarch grass." "All right." The young man hurriedly walked over to the wall to write down the answer. Not expecting the other party to see through the crux of the problem with a glance as well, even coming up with the same answer as his teacher, Dan Xiaotian widened his eyes in astonishment. He turned to his teacher and exclaimed, "But we were the ones who found the answer first." He had been doubting the accuracy of his teacher's answer when those from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion came over and gave the same answer. That meant that there was really no mistake with his teacher's answer. However, if it was the group from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion who gave the answer instead, it meant that the ethereal token would go to them instead. Just as Dan Xiaotian was about to rush over, he felt someone grasp his wrist tightly. It was his teacher. Don't bother, it's too late now. Dan Xiaotian turned his head over and saw that the young man from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion had already written down the answer on the wall before pressing his palm down on it lightly. Wang. A brilliant red light flashed from the surface of the wall. It's the correct answer. As expected of an expert from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, he was actually able to solve the problem with just a swift glance. I have long heard that the experts of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion were figures who stood at the peak of this world, and it seems like that's truly the case. Their reputation is not unfounded at all. The number of disciples accepted by the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion each time around is extremely limited. I wonder how many people from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion will be able to meet the mark this time around. It might just be a mere menial disciple, but it symbolizes the opportunity to rise to become an outer disciple, then an inner disciple, and finally a direct disciple. My bet is that there will be just 3 people. It has always been like that. A huge commotion broke out amid the crowd. Even a question that had stumped the whole of Zhenjiang City for more than a decade was solved so easily by the group from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Those from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion were truly extraordinary beings. Young master, I would like to congratulate you on solving the final problem of the Hongyang market. This is the reward that we have prepared for you. Very soon, a slightly plump middle-aged man walked over with a fawning smile on his face. He was holding onto an opened wooden chest carefully with both of his hands, and sitting in the middle of the chest was a palm-sized token. The token was densely inscribed, and one could feel slight pulsations of spiritual energy coming from it. Is that the ethereal token? I heard that even a single one of those costs 100,000 ethereal coins. Wow! I don't think I can't ever afford that in my entire life. They might all be cultivators who had grown up in the azure, but the ethereal token was a commodity that only the upper echelons of the continent possessed. There were only a few of them in Zhenjiang City, so most of them had never seen one before. The grey-robed man grabbed the ethereal token in between his 2 fingers and drove his zhonqi through it. After confirming that it was the real deal, he nodded in satisfaction before sliding it into Xueqin's hands. I'll give it to you. Xueqin's eyes widened in delight as she received the ethereal token, and even her breathing hastened from agitation. It was not just the value of this gift that excited her. What was more important was the significance behind the gift. It was already a huge blessing for her to be able to become a menial disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, but to receive a gift directly from the young man before her. With this, she would become the envy of the entire town. Holding on to the ethereal token tightly, Xueqin bowed down and said, "Thank you, senior." After giving her thanks, she suddenly noticed Dan Xiaotian amid the crowd, and a sharp glint flashed through her eyes. She immediately made her way over to the latter, and with a mocking smile on her lips, she said in a hushed voice, "You're here as well? Were you trying to obtain this ethereal token to turn your situation around? What a pity though, it's already mine. You really should learn your place. Do you think that a person like you is worthy of possessing an ethereal token?" Naive. Previously, she had been afraid that the rejection of the marriage proposal would affect her reputation, but with a senior from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion taking such care of her, she had nothing to fear anymore. What did Dan Xiaotian even count as? They were already in 2 different worlds, so what did she have to fear about him? Of course, there was also the fact that the area was filled with men from the City Lord Manor, so no one would dare leak the news out. Not even the wandering cultivators who had dropped by to try their luck would dare speak a word of the matter as long as they valued their lives. Besides, she was not speaking too loudly, so it would be hard to discern what she was saying. You. Dan Xiaotian's body stiffened at being humiliated once more. Who is he? The grey-robed young man suddenly asked. He's just a friend I have met in the past. Xueqin scoffed at Dan Xiaotian one last time before turning around to face the grey-robed young man, replacing her scorn with a sweet smile in the blink of an eye. Let's go, the grey-robed young man said before walking away. Xueqin quickly rushed forward to keep up with him. Dan Xiaotian trembled quietly with a lowered head for a moment before he turned to Zhongxian with an apologetic look on his face. I'm sorry, teacher. His teacher had already revealed the correct answer, But he had actually doubted his teacher. If not for his teacher spending some time to explain the matter to him, the ethereal token would already have been theirs. To receive such a valuable gift from her senior. It seems like that fiancé of yours didn't acquire her position as a menial disciple of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion through proper avenues, Zhong Xian remarked deeply before turning to look at Dan Xiaotian with a smile on his lips. Do you wish to return the favor? Return the favor? Dan Xiaotian was taken aback. Xue Qin already had the experts of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion on her side, so how could they possibly exact vengeance on her? Chapter 1920 You're wrong, watch closely. Without explaining himself, Zhong Xian walked forward and shouted, that friend from the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion over there, may I ask you to stop for a short moment? The grey-robed young man continued walking away without any hesitation, as if not having heard Zhong Xian's voice at all. The edges of Zhong Xian's lips crept up as he continued. Friend, the answer you provided is inaccurate. I don't think that it's very fair for you to leave with the ethereal token just like that. His voice was extremely loud, suppressing the surrounding voices in an instant. Everyone turned to look at him with stupefied looks on their faces. The other party was an expert of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion, and to actually claim that he was wrong so publicly. Are you tired of living? The grey-robed young man halted in his tracks and turned around to look at Zhong Xian with a deep frown etched on his forehead. With an awful look on her face, Xue Qin coldly spat, Dan Xiaotian. If you don't want to die, you'd better keep your subordinate's mouth in check. She recognized the mummy standing before her as none other than the person who had spoken up against them earlier at the Dan clan. It was out of magnanimity that she did not pursue his insolence, but who could have known that he would dare to continue spout nonsense? He isn't my subordinate. He's my teacher. In a moment of anxiety, Dan Xiaotian began stuttering once again. Teacher. No matter what, the Dan clan was still once a formidable existence. When did you fall so far such that even weaklings like him are worthy of being your teacher? Xue Qin remarked disdainfully. I don't think it's any business of yours who Dan Xiaotian acknowledges as his teacher. Unless, you are still dreaming of becoming his fiancé, Zhong Xian replied calmly. You. Xue Qin's body stiffened upon hearing those words. Seeing Xue Qin's response, a cold glint flashed through the eyes of the grey-robed young man. He gazed down at the mummy before him coldly and said, You mentioned that my answer isn't correct. Indeed, Zhong Xian replied. To show you that I'm not making things up, I am even willing to make a bet with you. The one who loses will be subjected to the other party's command. You are courageous to speak to me in such a manner, the grey-robed man remarked as he assessed Zhong Xian nonchalantly. Tell me, what is your basis for determining that my answer is wrong? There's no need for that. There's a much easier way to resolve this problem than with our mouths. All we need to do is find an apothecary to forge the nurturing young pill based on the answer you have provided and feed that pill to someone. You will understand once you see it, Zhong Xian said. You want to test the practicality of the solution I have provided? The grey-robed young man frowned. The first response that came to his mind was to reject Zhong Xian's request because he felt that it was too troublesome, but when his gaze swept across the crowd, he noticed doubtful looks on their faces. So, after a brief moment of silence, he raised his hand and said, Bring an apothecary over. The young man following behind him quickly left the group, and not long later, he returned with the plump middle-aged man who had brought the ethereal token over earlier, as well as 2 apothecaries. The plump middle-aged man snapped his fingers, and a large army of attendants immediately rushed forward to set up a table of medicinal herbs and 2 cauldrons. I need the 2 of you to forge the nurturing young pill according to the formula over there. The plump middle-aged man instructed the 2 apothecaries. Nodding, the 2 apothecaries swiftly began forging the nurturing young pill. They followed the instructions written on the wall precisely, adding medicinal herbs one after another with impeccable timing. When it was finally time to add in the inferno grass stem, they threw the spirit matriarch grass in instead. As soon as the spirit matriarch grass was thrown in, the 2 cauldrons immediately began rattling non-stop. One of the apothecaries could not contain the billowing energies within the cauldron, and eventually, the entire cauldron exploded deafeningly on the spot. It was fortunate that protective measures had been taken beforehand, so no one was hurt as a result of the accident. Nevertheless, the explosion still intimidated many people amid the crowd. They hurriedly backed a distance away as they continued watching the pill forging process worriedly. The remaining apothecary was clearly more skilled as he controlled the responses of the medicinal herbs adept. An hour later, a set of freshly baked nurturing yang pills was finally delivered out of the cauldron. Its surface glistened beautifully with a natural shine. It seemed that their luck was not too bad. Not only were the pills formed, they had even reached the level of perfection. Good. After seeing the pills, the grey-robed young man nodded in approval. He quickly scanned the crowd before beckoning a young man over. The cultivation technique you practice seems to be yang attribute in nature. I need you to help me test the medicinal properties of the pill. Perhaps due to his trust in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, the young man swallowed the pill without any hesitation. The pill swiftly melted in his mouth, and a tremendous amount of yang energy swiftly flowed into his meridians. It took only an instant for the young man's face to turn scarlet. The young man hurriedly sat down to drive his zhenqi, hoping to keep the influx of yang energy under control for his own assimilation, but the more he tried to control the yang energy, the greater the backlash he faced. Eventually, white smoke began rising from the top of his head. It did not take too long for his eyes to start reddening as the heat started getting the better of him. I can't stand it any longer. Unable to take it any longer, the young man rushed up to one of the aunties watching the spectacle and reached out to rip her clothes. TSLA. The ripped clothes scattered all over the ground. Without any hesitation, the young man began to force himself on the auntie to carry out some indescribable act, but there was an abrupt sharp pain at the back of his neck before he collapsed onto the ground. The grey-robed young man of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion had stepped in at the vital moment to prevent a tragedy from occurring. The fact that the young man had only gone berserk after eating the nurturing yang pill showed that his pill formula was insufficient in resolving its problems. Not only so, the side effects seemed to have worsened. The young man who had consumed the pill could not control his impulses at all. The pill formula that I have come up with does have some problems. With an awful look on his face, the grey-robed young man turned his head over to Zhongxian and asked, however, how did you know about it? Do you, by any chance, know the correct answer? To be honest, he had heard of this problem prior to coming to Zhenjiang City, and he had conducted quite a bit of research before coming up with the correct answer. He definitely did not manage to solve the problem as easily as he had made it appear. The main reason he wanted to put up such an act was to bulk up the reputation of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion in Zhenjiang City. Just that, who could have known that instead of bulking up the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's reputation, he would end up being humiliated instead? As displeased as he was, he knew that it would unwise for him to lose his temper. He would only embarrass himself further if he displayed a lack of graciousness. I do have an answer, Zhongxian replied with a smile. He whispered into Dan Xiaotian's ear, and the latter looked at him with a bizarre expression. After confirming that Zhongxian was not joking with him, he walked up to the wall and penned down an answer with a brush before handing it forward. Just like before, a red light flashed from the wall. The grey-robed young man frowned as he impatiently remarked, "The person checking the answer is right here, so why don't you just read it out loud?" What was the point of beating about the bush when the manager of the Hongyang market was already standing among them? The young man could just read out the answer, and they would be able to discern whether it was right or not together. Dan Xiaotian looked at his teacher, and after receiving a confirmatory nod, he began reading out the answer that he had written out earlier with an awkward look on his face. Change the Inferno grass stem to Spirit Matriarch grass. The crowd was silent for a moment before a huge commotion broke out. Was I hearing things? Isn't the answer the same as the one that the young man from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion came up with? The grey-robed young man also narrowed his eyes as a menacing aura flowed out from him. Are you trying to mock me? The other party had confidently pointed out that he was wrong, but he had ended up giving the same answer. Just what the hell was the other party up to? Dan Xiaotian himself was feeling a little giddy as well. He had completely no idea what his teacher was up to. Don't you know that trying to make fun of an expert like this is a huge taboo? You'll lose your life. You are thinking too much, Zhongxian replied calmly before shooting an exasperated glance at Dan Xiaotian. What are you doing? There is still a label at the end, right? Read it out. Ah, right. Dan Xiaotian nodded as he hurriedly continued. After the solution, there's a bracket that states not local. Not local? Wait a moment, what does that mean? Everyone was bewildered by the additional label. Even the grey-robed young man was unable to make sense of what was happening. What did not local refer to? Was there some kind of difference between the local spirit matriarch grass and those not from the region? The nurturing young pill serves to reinforce the yang energy of a cultivator. In order to stabilize the effects of the pill, swapping the inferno grass stem with the spirit matriarch grass is indeed the ideal solution. In fact, the solution you have proposed would have surely worked out if the pill forging was conducted anywhere else, Zhongxian said as he slowly walked up to the cauldron and touched the medicinal sludge from the exploded cauldron earlier. However, the solution simply doesn't work here. Xianjiang City has its back facing the Xian River, and that's where its name originates from. This river originates from the sea, and what flows through it isn't fresh water but salt water. The crowd nodded in agreement. While Xianjiang City was not located near the sea, it was connected to it through the Xian River. However, it was a pity that what flowed through the Xian River was salt water, making it unsuitable for drinking or commercial activities. As such, despite its decent location, it had still failed to develop into a major city. Among the territories of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, it could only be considered a third-rate city. Its economy was not doing too well at all. As a result, the farmlands in the area were irrigated with salt water, and the plants growing in the region carry some salt content. At this point, I would like to invite everyone to take a closer look at this medicinal sludge. Do you notice anything peculiar about it? Zhongxian asked as he showed his hands to the others. The crowd leaned in to take a closer look. Amid the black mess on his finger, there was a layer of white powder. It was faint, but as saint cultivators, they were able to easily tell what it was. The grey-robed young man also walked up to the medicinal sludge to take a closer look before touching it slightly. White powder stained the tip of his finger. He brought it to his lips and licked it, and there was a slightly salty taste. It's salt. The grey-robed young man nodded. Following which, Zhongxian continued his explanation. The spirit matriarch grass lives in marshlands, thriving in dark, damp locations. Its leaves should have carried a slight acidity, but this is neutralized by the salt content of the other medicinal herbs, and that ruins the yin attribute of the spirit matriarch grass. As such, it is unable to serve as a medium to calm medicinal energies contained in the other medicinal herbs, resulting in the yang energy becoming even more violent after losing the inferno grass stem. That's also why the young man completely lost control of his rationality earlier after consuming the nurturing yang pill. He was completely overwhelmed by heat. There's actually such a factor. Fervent discussions could be heard all around. Had pill forging always been such a delicate process such that even a slight change in the environment would make a huge difference? The grey-robed young man was slightly taken aback. Was this really why his pill formula had failed? He swiftly examined the remaining medicinal herbs that had not been used for the pill forging. With a tap of his finger, he ignited one of the medicinal herbs, and upon closer examination, he noticed some salt amid the ashes too. Pill forging is a very delicate process. The difference in a single medicinal herb or a single process could easily result in failure. Countless medicinal herbs could be ruined just because of a slight difference. Naturally, an apothecary has to take note of the geographical location, the local climate, the state of the cauldron, one's state of mind, and the techniques utilized in the forging process. All of this has to be considered before one embarks on the pill forging. A mistake is a mistake. I know that someone from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion won't deny that, right? Zhongxian asked with a gentle smile. My misjudgment has indeed resulted in a failed pill forging, I'll admit that much. Knowing that he would only hurt his reputation if he argued his way out of this, the grey-robed young man harumphed coldly. I'll give the ethereal token to you then. Without any hesitation, he took the ethereal token from Xueqin's hands and tossed it over to Zhongxian. Xue Qin's face twitched as she felt a burning sensation on her face. It was just a moment ago that she had obtained this invaluable treasure, but in less than 2 hours, it was already another man's possession. I shall humbly accept the gift, Zhongxian replied as he slipped the ethereal token into his pocket. Then, his eyebrows suddenly shot up as a realization seemed to have struck him. Oh right, I nearly forgot. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to have a bet with you and that the one who lost the bet would have to listen to the winner's command. You didn't agree to the bet explicitly, but neither did you reject it. Since that's the case, should I take it that the bet is still effective? Seeing that Zhongxian was pushing the boundaries, the eyes of the grey-robed young man narrowed threateningly. He had never thought that a person from this remote city would actually be able to corner him to such an extent. On the other hand, Zhongxian seemed to be completely oblivious to the grey-robed young man's rage as he pointed to Shuiyang nonchalantly and said, "Well, my command isn't anything much. I just want you to give Xue Qin over here 3 crisp slaps in my stead." What? Xue Qin's face warped in horror upon hearing those words. Chapter 1921 Virtual Reality. If she really was slapped, what would become of her dignity? With a trembling body, Xue Qin hurriedly turned to the grey-robed young man and pleaded, "Senior, you mustn't listen to that fellow's nonsense. He's just spewing a load of CR*P. Until we really forge the nurturing young pill according to his instructions, we won't know if what he's saying is the right answer." But before she could finish her words, the grey-robed young man had also turned to face her, and with 3 swift strokes, he slapped her thrice. Forehand, pa. Backhand, pa. Forehand, pa. Every single strike echoed loudly into the surroundings. The young lady's smooth and delicate skin immediately began swelling up. "Is that enough for you?" The grey-robed young man gazed at Zhongxian coldly with his hands behind his back. He was extremely adept at pill forging, and he had made sure to check all the details personally. Even without forging the nurturing young pill, he already knew that the young man was correct. Since the answer was already clear, any obstinacy beyond this point would only sully the good reputation of not only him but the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion too. "Ah. It was just a casual remark when I told you to slap her. She's just a young lady, and it's not as if she has a marriage agreement with me but went to the extent of coming over to my residence to coerce me to back out of our marriage agreement. But I guess what's done is done, so let's say we're even with that. Please, feel free to be on your way." Zhongxian bowed slightly as if to send the grey-robed young man away. The grey-robed young man took one last chilling look at Zhongxian before turning around to leave. The others that had come with him quickly left along with him. As for the fainted young man, one of the members of the group picked him up and took him away. They had planned to make use of this as an opportunity to display their prowess and earn the respect of those in the Shenjiang city, but it had completely backfired on them. A tremendous amount of rage was boiling in their blood. After leaving the market, the grey-robed young man looked at the swollen-faced Xue Qin and asked with narrowed eyes, "Who was that?" Xue Qin shuddered at the chilling voice of the grey-robed young man, and she quickly explained herself. "Senior, I really don't know that person. I was referring to that crippled young man," the grey-robed young man interjected sharply. "Kchi." Xue Qin's face turned ghastly pale. "He has a marriage agreement with me. It was decided by the elders of our clans. However, there's really nothing between us. We haven't even met more than a couple of times. You should know why you were accepted as a menial disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion," the grey-robed young man remarked coldly. "In order for inner disciples to focus on their cultivation, they require servants to attend to their needs. It's out of special consideration of your looks and the fact that you are still a maiden that I made an exception and allowed you to join us as a servant and a concubine." "I understand." Xue Qin lowered her head subserviently. "That had better be the case," the grey-robed young man said with an impatient wave of his hand. He walked over to the carriage not too far away and got onto it. Before the carriage set off, his nonchalant voice echoed from within. "I expect you to settle this matter prudently before it reaches the ears of the Sword Pavilion. Also, I want to know the identity and background of that bandaged fellow by tonight. Elder Lu Yun will be here in 3 days, and I don't expect any complications as a result of this." Understood. Understood. Xueqin bowed fearfully, not daring to even breathe loudly. Da. The carriage finally began moving away. Only at this moment did Xueqin realize that her back was drenched in sweat. She glanced back at the Hongyang market with a murderous look on her face. Tell my teacher that we'll be making a move tonight, she spat coldly. Yes, second young mistress, the young men following behind her replied. Thank you, teacher. Seeing how Xueqin, who had humiliated him time and time again, had been struck in public, Dan Xiaotian felt a little conflicted within. Nevertheless, he knew that his teacher was doing this for him, and he felt extremely grateful for that. Since you are my student, there's no way I'll allow you to be wronged, Zhongxian replied with a smile. All right, I need you to bring me to a quiet room. I would like to test out the ethereal token. Yes, teacher. Dan Xiaotian nodded. He quickly approached the middle-aged man from earlier, and before long, they were brought to a silent chamber. Upon entering the chamber, Zhongxian inspected its interior and found that the area had been secured by multiple layers of formations, ensuring its privacy. He nodded in satisfaction before taking the ethereal token out. Teacher, I heard that the ethereal token requires very specific instructions in order to activate it, and a complete activation requires one to pay quite a heavy price. But before Dan Xiaotian could finish his words, he saw his teacher tapping a few points on the ethereal token, and a resounding wong echoed through the chamber. A brilliant light shone from the surface of the jade token. It had been completely activated. Following which, Zhongxian dripped a droplet of blood on the ethereal token, and the brilliant light immediately warped into intricate patterns before seeping into his glabella. This sight left Dan Xiaotian stunned. Based on what he knew, activating the ethereal token was a delicate process, so more often than not, one would have to spend a huge number of ethereal coins in order to engage the help of an expert for a complete activation. Who could have known that his teacher would be able to activate and tame the ethereal token so easily, as if he had done it many times before? Paying no heed to Dan Xiaotian's astonishment, Zhongxian carefully perceived the light seeping into his glabella, and only after confirming that it posed no danger to him did he heave a sigh of relief. Who? The next moment, his consciousness escaped from his body to enter a unique dimension. This. Lowering his head, he found that his body had become something that was a mix of reality and illusion. Welcome to the ethereal hall. While Zhongxian was still making sense of his current situation, a voice suddenly sounded in the air. This voice. Zhongxian widened his eyes in astonishment. This voice was surprisingly familiar to him. There was no mistake about it. Kongsha. It was Kongsha's voice. He knew that Kongsha had definitely come to the Azure, but he did not think that the latter would be related to the strongest power of the Azure, the ethereal hall. Or could it be that the ethereal hall had been created by Kongsha? Dan Xiaotian mentioned that the ethereal hall was created several thousand years ago by a formidable expert, but judging by the timeline, Kongsha should have left the master-teacher continent tens of thousands of years ago. Zhongxian's brain churned swiftly to draw links. At this moment, a possibility suddenly arose in his mind, causing his eyebrows to leap up. Could it be that the flow of time in the Azure differs from that of the master-teacher continent? There had been a whole string of trouble ever since he awoke, so he had not had a chance to really examine the Azure. But now that he was looking at it carefully, there was indeed a difference in the flow of time in the Azure and on the master-teacher continent. As he was making sense of all of this, the earlier voice continued speaking. I established the ethereal hall to allow cultivators to interact with one another and trade safely. In here, you are able to alter your appearance and aura, so there's no need to worry about anyone noticing your true identity in the real world. As long as you are willing to pay the price, you will be able to learn the cultivation techniques you wish to learn. Within the ethereal hall, everyone is of the same cultivation realm. There's no segregation as a result of standing or power difference. Everyone will be able to interact with one another on equal terms. That's all I want to say to you. May you enjoy your time at the ethereal hall. The voice suddenly trailed off. Those words made Zhongxian more certain than ever that Kongsha was the person behind the ethereal hall. After all, it was his vision to create a world where all humans were equally entitled to cultivate and learn. He knew that he would be able to find traces of Kongsha in the azure, but considering the time difference, he had thought that it would take a while before he finally heard anything about the latter. Yet, a single ethereal token had been able to provide him with so much information. Suppressing his agitation, he swiftly went through Kongsha's words when a bizarre thought suddenly occurred to him. Assuming anonymous identities and interacting with one another as equals. Isn't this pretty much like online chat rooms? Chapter 1922 Dueling Ring Technology had been an integral part of life in his previous world. It brought great convenience to the world, allowing for communication or shopping to be done remotely. It allowed people to assume anonymous new identities and enjoy a life aside from the real world. Often, a person whom you addressed as your wife over the internet could very well end up being a nose-picking middle-aged man. As formidable as the ethereal token was, it seemed to work on the same principles. Upon entering the ethereal hall, one would be able to conceal one's identity, and the strength of all cultivators would be equalized. This meant that it would be impossible for a person to tell if the person whom they had been chatting with was a male or female, an expert or an ordinary cultivator. This is fine. The cultivators will be able to release the restraints they impose on themselves in consideration of their reputation and pursue what they truly want. It makes it easier for them to seek pointers from one another regarding their cultivation. This might be the motive behind why Kongsha created this system. Kongsha promoted education without discrimination, and he hoped to create a world where all humans could stand tall. However, cultivation resources were scarce, and one's birth, talent, and opportunities were bound to determine one's future accomplishments. His ultimate vision was simply not realistic. In his time on the Master-Teacher continent, he had founded the Master-Teacher Pavilion, but the system that he had put in place was marred by the ambitions of those who wished to climb up the hierarchy. He had created the Kungsu domain shortly after, but it had likely made him realize that it was impossible to achieve true equality in the real world. Thus, he had founded the Ethereal Hall and created the ethereal tokens. Here, one would have to cast aside one's previous identity and everything related to it. With an anonymous identity and equal strength, everyone would be on equal footing with one another. With just a thought, Zhongxian's appearance immediately began changing, making him appear more ordinary. He tried clenching his fists and threw a punch out. The strength that he could draw forth was roughly equivalent to a Saint Wandan cultivator. In other words, no matter how powerful a cultivator was, he could only exert the strength of a Saint Wandan cultivator in here. Zhongxian spent some time testing out his new body, but fortunately, it seemed like there was no fundamental difference between it and his real body. He began walking forward, and soon, a grand palace appeared before his eyes. Ethereal Hall, Starlight City. Starlight City is a second-tier city, and Shenjiang City happens to be under its jurisdiction, Zhongxian recalled based on Dan Xiaoqian's explanation, and he shook his head with a smile. It's even a regional network. To use the terminology from his previous world, there were only servers in the cities where the Ethereal Hall had branches. There was no branch in Shenjiang City, so anyone trying to access the Ethereal Hall from there needed to connect to the higher Starlight City's server. Zhongxian pushed the door open and walked into the palace. A huge crowd immediately appeared right in front of him. Just like social networking games in his previous life, even though everyone had different appearances and figures, the strength that they wielded was the same as one another. They might be far from one another geographically, but at that moment, they were seated alongside one another to trade insights regarding cultivation or even to negotiate important business deals. Through sharing knowledge on a common platform, the rate at which information traveled would be greatly enhanced. Perhaps, this was the building block that would drive the Azure toward something similar to his previous world's digital age. After a moment of curious observation, Zhongxian knew that the urgent matter at hand was to heal his injuries, so he headed to the front counter of the Ethereal Hall and called for an attendant. "Do you have any recovery medicine here? I would like to purchase some. May I ask what tier of medicine you are looking for?" The attendant was a young man dressed in a uniform, and his appearance looked considerably dashing. Of course, it was unlikely that this was his original appearance. This was similar to how many people like to use the photos of popular individuals, such as that author named Heng Suro Tian Yarrow, as their online profile pictures. "I need something that can heal the injuries of a dimension shatterer realm cultivator," Zhongxian replied. On his way there, he had verified the various cultivation realms in the Azure, and it seemed like there were 4 tiers of ancient sages, and the names of the realms were the same. As for what lay beyond ancient sage, it appeared that even Dan Xiaotian himself had no idea what it was, so he was unable to satisfy his curiosity. "We do have the whitewood pill and blue sun pill here," the young man said as he passed 2 jade bottles over. Zhongxian took the 2 jade bottles, pried open their lids, and took a careful look at them. He could not help but marvel at just how detailed the world that Kongsha had created was. He was well aware that he was in an illusory world, but the spiritual energy and medicinal energy harnessed within those 2 pills felt so tangible that he could not help but wonder if they were actually existent. "But I have never heard of these 2 pills before though, so I don't really know which one will be more useful to me." In the end, the Azure and the Master-Teacher continent were 2 different worlds. While both worlds had apothecaries, their practices and techniques varied greatly from one another, so he was unable to accurately gauge the healing properties of those 2 pills. He was just about to ask the attendant for more information when an idea suddenly popped into his head. He placed his finger on the whitewood pill lightly and muttered, "Flaws." Since he was able to use the Library of Heaven's Path with his soul, was it possible for him to use it here as well? Wang. There was a jolt in his head, and a book materialized in the Library of Heaven's Path. "It works." Zhongxian's eyes lit up in delight. Even though the pills were fake, it seemed like the Library of Heaven's Path was still able to process the information in the ethereal hall to analyze its strengths and weaknesses before compiling that into a book. The whitewood pill uses the whitewood grass as its main ingredient, making it excellent for healing the soul injuries sustained by dimension shatterer realm cultivators. The blue sun pill uses the blood of saint beasts as its key ingredient, and it has remarkable effects in healing one's physical wounds and recovering one's zhenqi. "The bulk of my injuries lie in my physical body and my zhenqi, so I guess I should choose the blue sun pill." Having made up his mind, Zhongxian relayed his intention to the attendant. "The blue sun pill will cost 20,000 ethereal coins each. May I know how you wish to pay for the pill? Do you have an ethereal card?" the attendant asked with a sweet smile on his face. 20,000 ethereal coins? Zhongxian's eyebrows leaped up. He did not have a single ethereal coin with him, so 20,000 ethereal coins was clearly far out of his league. Besides, what in the freaking cow was an ethereal card? So far, it had been roughly 4 hours since he had awoken, but he had already gotten a clear glimpse as to the purchasing power of the ethereal coin. If Dan Xiaotian sold the residence that he was living in, he would receive 5,000 ethereal coins at most, which meant that the entire residence was only worth a quarter to this blue sun pill. I guess it's time for me to start earning some money once more. Zhongxian rubbed his glabella in distress. He had finally climbed to the apex of the master-teacher continent, commanding greater clout than anyone else. He had thought that he had finally struggled out of poverty and would never have to worry about money again, but in the blink of an eye, he was reduced back to the penniless lad he used to be. It sure was exasperating. He suddenly thought of the times when he had impersonated as Yang Shi to give others guidance so as to earn the money required to solve Zhao Yue's affliction. Was he going to have to do the same in the Azure? While it was convenient for him to assume an anonymous identity here, he was a humble and low-profile person at heart. There was nothing in this world that he detested more than showing off in such a manner. Sighing helplessly, he raised his head to look at the attendant before him and asked, "May I ask what kind of ways there are to earn money quickly here?" Earn money? Those words made the attendant realize that the person standing before him did not have the means to purchase the blue sun pill. While he did not reveal anything on his face, the warmth in his eyes cooled a little. He had thought that the other party was a big fish, asking for a 20,000 ethereal coins pill as soon as he walked up to the stall, but as it turned out, the other party was poor. The easiest way to earn money is through fighting open duels in the city's dueling ring, the attendant replied nonchalantly. As long as you don't leave the dueling ring, the amount of money you can earn will increase by twofold each round. In the first round, you can earn 100 ethereal coins, and this will increase to 200 ethereal coins in the second round, 400 ethereal coins in the third round, and so on. All in all, as long as you don't lose, you should be able to earn ethereal coins quickly. As long as you are able to win 8 rounds consecutively, you will be able to rack up enough money to buy the Blue Sun pill. I see. Zhongxian nodded in response. He had made a misjudgment earlier. It was true that limiting everyone's cultivation to Saint 1 Dan did reduce the power difference among everyone, but that did not mean that they were equally powerful. Depending on one's interpretation of cultivation, fighting style, and reflexes, there could be a vast difference in the fighting prowess of different individuals even if they did have the same zhenqi capacity. If anything, it would be even more testing on one's skills and techniques. Besides, just because everyone's cultivation was suppressed to the same level, it would be naive to think that an ordinary saint cultivator would be able to defeat an ancient sage cultivator. The precision of their control and battle experience would make a world of difference. The ethereal hall could not erase all inequality among cultivators, or perhaps it was not its aim to do so. By reducing the power difference among cultivators, it would put the emphasis on techniques and skills, thus motivating cultivators to work on those as well. May I know where the dueling ring is? I'd like to register for the duels, Zhongxian said. You can register for the duel here. However, I would like to remind you that your opponents get more and more difficult with each round that you win. While you are winning more rounds, the opponents you are paired with are doing the same, the attendant said. I understand. Zhongxian nodded in response. This was basically the same as the ranked matches in games from his previous world. If you were a conqueror, the opponents you were paired with would be roughly around the same tier as you so that it would be a comparable match. But over here, regardless of whether his opponent was a diamond or a conqueror, it made no difference at all. He would crush them all one after another. In any case, he could use the Library of Heaven's path here, so there was no one who had an advantage over him. That's good. You'll have to pay the registration fee, 500 ethereal coins, the attendant said. 500? Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up in astonishment. Why is it so expensive? The ethereal hall doesn't just provide the location to conduct these duels, it records the video and provides a live feed of the battle to the other cultivators as well. All of this costs money, so naturally, there has to be a fee as well, the attendant replied. But I don't have 500 ethereal coins. Is it possible for me to use my possessions as a deposit instead? Or else, could I borrow the money from you for the time being? I'll return it twofold to you once I win the battles. Zhongxian scratched his head in embarrassment. Money was truly the greatest woe of a hero. As a godlike figure worshipped by countless on the master-teacher continent, it was embarrassing how he could not even take out 500 ethereal coins here. If word spread, it would really be a huge embarrassment. If you don't have the money to pay the registration fee, I'd advise you not to participate at all. The attendant finally reached the limits of his tolerance and snapped impatiently. A person who could not even take out 500 ethereal coins actually wanted to purchase a pill worth 20,000 ethereal coins. It was as if he thought that he could easily win the duels and earn a fortune for himself. Just where in this world did this naive lad come from? Furthermore, how in the world could he trust the other party to return his money when they did not even know one another? Impossible. This. Seeing through the attendant's derision, Zhongxian sighed deeply and said, My ethereal token should be worth more than 500 ethereal coins. I should at least be able to use it as a deposit for the duel, right? Since the ethereal token was distributed by the ethereal hall, the system should be able to accept it as a deposit. I guess that works. However, I'd just like to offer you one last piece of advice. If you fail to repay your debt within 3 days, the ethereal token that you are using will be resealed, preventing you from using it ever again, the attendant replied. Since the ethereal hall was able to allow cultivators to connect to them via the ethereal token, naturally, they were able to terminate the connection as well. I understand. Zhongxian nodded. Seeing that Zhongxian knew what he was getting into, the young man impatiently processed the request. Some time later, he passed a card over to Zhongxian. This is your ethereal card, and stored inside are the 500 ethereal coins you have borrowed. As long as you sign up for the duel, the sum will automatically be deducted from your card. Similarly, the reward for your victory will automatically be stored within your card, so you need not worry. Seeing that the process was automated, Zhong Xian was relieved to know that he would be spared from much trouble. He quickly put the card away before heading toward the dueling ring. Chapter 1923. My name is World's Edge. There was nothing that induced one's improvement faster than practical battle, and this was the same wherever one went. However, practical battles came at a risk. There was a chance that one might get injured or even die, but these problems were not an issue in the ethereal hall. It was for this reason that the dueling ring was a popular location in the ethereal hall for cultivators to head to. As Zhong Xian was nearing his destination, he saw a lot of people gathered together before a crystal-like screen with agitated looks on their faces. On the screen, there were two figures clashing intensely with one another. Their cultivation might only have been at St. One Dan, but their battle was still exciting to veteran fighters. Their maneuvers were sharp and well calculated, and the sheer precision of their movements was amazing. There were hardly any wasted movements at all, and the battle techniques that they executed often achieved unexpected effects in influencing the flow of the battle. Windherder has already won 5 rounds so far. He really is amazing. Amazing is an understatement, alright. His grasp of his battle techniques is terrifying. Every single move he executed is measured to an extremely precise degree, such that it reveals no openings for his opponent to exploit at all. I would be content if I could just reach his level of proficiency. Watching his battles are a huge enjoyment in itself. Not only so, I am also able to learn quite a few combat techniques from him and enhance my own fighting style. Such discussions could be heard from the crowd. It was not without reason that the ethereal token was so highly sought after by the cultivators in the Azure. It served not only as an online market but a perfect underground ring too. Not only did the fighters not need to fear getting injured, even the spectators could learn much from watching the battles. To be careful, Zhong Xian did not rush into registering for the duels but instead chose to spectate the duels of other cultivators for the time being so as to gauge the average strength of the cultivators there. Due to the cultivation cap of St. One Dan, the battle techniques that the cultivators were able to execute were severely limited. Thus, what really determined the battle was their grasp of timing and precision of the execution of battle techniques. More often than not, it was the cultivator who was more decisive and had sharper moves who emerged victorious. Having a deeper understanding of the dueling ring, Zhong Xian walked over to the registration counter and passed his ethereal card over. What name do you wish to go by? It's fine to use a nickname too, the person at the counter, a young lady in her 20s, asked. Nickname? Zhong Xian pondered for a moment. Such dueling ring would require one to take on a nickname so that it would be easier to refer to them. Since I am able to preserve my anonymity in here, I shouldn't use my real name, Zhong Xian thought. Doing so would be just like the fools who used their real names on the internet in his previous life. Let me see. Yang Xian, Sun Qiong, Xian Zhong, Luo Tianya. The identities Zhong Xian had assumed in the past flashed through his head in an instant, and the next moment, he said, Call me. World's Edge. World's Edge. The young lady nodded as she jotted the name down on a book before her. It did not take long for his match to be arranged. Next round, World's Edge versus Shadow Lurker. Amid roaring cheers, Zhong Xian walked into the dueling ring. The dueling ring was circular in shape, and the surroundings were sealed by a crystalline barrier. Through the screens around the dueling ring, spectators were able to see the details of the duel from outside. The opponent that he was facing was a slim, middle-aged man. Even though their cultivation was both St. One Dan, he commanded an aura that pressurized his opponents. I've heard of Shadow Lurker before. Even though this is his first duel, he's actually quite a formidable expert. Indeed. I chatted with him earlier, and we even exchanged a few blows. His reflexes and movement speed are truly top-notch. At the very least, I gauge that his cultivation must be equivalent to Dimension Shatterer Realm Intermediate stage. He's actually so powerful. The ethereal hall really is filled with many experts. It seems like that there will be something interesting to look out for in this match then. Just that. I wonder if World's Edge will be able to put up a worthy fight. His name sounds so childish. I doubt that he's a formidable expert. Indeed, What world's edge? It makes me cringe just by listening to it. It was impossible to determine a person's true identity through the ethereal token, but nevertheless, through casual conversation and exchanging blows, it was still possible to roughly gauge a person's true strength and standing as long as the person was not intentionally hiding it. Those who had interacted with Shadow Lurker before knew that he was a fairly powerful cultivator. As such, they did not think too well of the fellow he was going to face. Let's begin. Shadow Lurker gazed at the young man before him coldly and taunted, "I won't be going easy on you." He was planning to make use of this opportunity to forge a name for himself in the ethereal hall. Just like those experts who had made their fame there by achieved consecutive victories, he would do the same and make the name Shadow Lurker resound across the entire ethereal hall. On the other hand, Zhongxian lifted his hand and beckoned him. "Let's start then." "Who?" With light footsteps, Shadow Lurker flitted toward Zhongxian with bizarre footwork that caused his silhouette to appear a little illusory. Seeing the other party's moves, Zhongxian nodded slightly. While the occupations in the Azure were not as developed as the Master-Teacher continent, their grasp of battle techniques and combat skills were clearly superior. Any single one of them would be more than a match for the Master-Teachers of the Master-Teacher Pavilion. Of course, this might be due to their possession of the ethereal token too. After all, not even combat masters could keep fighting on and on without getting injured. "I can't win right away, or else it'll be hard for me to get matched with my next opponent," Zhongxian thought. As profound as Shadow Lurker's moves appeared to be, Zhongxian was still able to see at least 8 flaws in them without relying on the library of Heaven's Path. It would be a walk in the park for him to achieve victory. But this was an open duel. If he won in a single move, it would be difficult to find his next opponent. Without an opponent, how could he make his fortune? And if he did not earn sufficient money that day, the 10th direct disciple that he had just taken in could very well breathe his last breath tonight. Coming to realize all of this, Zhongxian swiftly charged forward to trade blows with his opponent. Peng peng peng. In the blink of an eye, he had already started clashing with Shadow Lurker. Oh! It seems like World's Edge isn't too weak. The move that Shadow Lurker executed earlier is the space-breaking footwork, right? Is it really possible for a Saint One Dan to execute such a powerful battle technique? Is that the drifting palm? Has it always been so powerful? Those two moves are incredibly ingenious, and yet, World's Edge managed to dodge them so easily. Is it just luck, or does he actually have something in him? When the battle first started, everyone thought that it would be completely one-sided. However, when the situation did not go as expected, everyone slowly widened their eyes in incredulity. Just as they had previously guessed, Shadow Lurker was indeed a powerful cultivator. His every single maneuver carried exceptional might. Despite that, even though World's Edge's moves were ordinary and a little flustered even, he was still able to dodge every one of Shadow Lurker's attacks and even find windows of opportunity to retaliate. This really cast doubt over the matter. If it was just luck, World's Edge could not have dodged Shadow Lurker's attacks by just a millimeter each and every time. But if World's Edge was truly doing it intentionally, just how powerful must he be to pull off such a dangerous feat each and every time? "Look, World's Edge is going to counterattack," someone suddenly shouted. In the first 10 blows or so, Shadow Lurker had been the one on the offensive, and World's Edge could only defend against his blows. But right now, the tables had turned. As Shadow Lurker found that his offense was not reaching his enemy at all, he slowly lost his patience, and World's Edge made use of this opportunity to control the flow of the battle. At that moment, Zhongxian wobbled unstably on the spot for a moment before abruptly thrusting his right palm forward. On the other hand, Shadow Lurker seemed to have expected this abrupt attack and was not caught off guard. Without any hesitation, he thrust his left palm forward to meet the other party's attack. Just as the two palms were about to meet, World's Edge suddenly pulled his right palm back and redirected the momentum of his strike to his left palm instead. Before anyone could even react, World's Edge had managed to strike Shadow Lurker squarely in the chest. To think that the previous right palm thrust was another feint. To be able to switch between feints and real attacks so freely, not even the Lord of Starlight City is capable of such a feat, right? You are underestimating the Lord of Starlight City too much. I have watched some of the City Lord's open duels over the past few years, and he has used similar moves before. What appeared to be a feint would suddenly turn into a real strike if one failed to guard against it, and vice versa. This is a move that requires perfect control over your body, otherwise it would be impossible to exert and retract strength so freely. Countless cultivators desire to learn this technique, but very few of them are able to get to the point where they can execute it in a real battle. I have practiced this technique for more than 3 years, but even I'm not completely confident in pulling it off safely. Yet, World's Edge actually managed to do it so easily. Frightening. Allow me to take back my earlier words, World's Edge is definitely a true expert. Could he possibly be the Lord of Starlight City in disguise? How can that be? I know the nickname used by the City Lord in his open duels, and it definitely isn't this. Someone who has won countless duels like the City Lord wouldn't have any reason to pass himself off as a minor figure who hasn't even won a single match, right? The ability to switch freely between feints and real attacks might not seem too difficult, but throughout Starlight City, there were no more than a handful of cultivators who were able to pull it off. Thus, it was inevitable that the crowd would be shocked to see such a high-level feat being executed by an unknown figure. Peng. The shadow lurker staggered backward several steps as fresh blood dripped from his lips. While it was impossible for cultivators to die for real in the ethereal hall, they would still experience pain and vomit blood after incurring injuries. This was to ensure an accurate simulation of reality. I have lost. Knowing that he would only lose more tragically if the battle continued, Shadow Lurker willingly admitted his defeat. He had intended to make use of this opportunity to make his name, but who could have known that he would be defeated in his very first battle? Right after, a young lady's voice sounded from the outside. Do you wish to proceed on to the next duel or leave the dueling ring? After clearing the first battle, one had the choice to continue battling or give up. I'll proceed on to the second round, Zhongxian replied without hesitation. While he did exert himself a little in the last battle, he still had plenty of strength left. Besides, he had not raked in the money that he needed to buy the Blue Sun pill yet, so how could he leave? Very soon, he had been paired up with an opponent. This time, his opponent was no longer a newbie but a veteran who had already fought several battles. His opponent seemed to have realized that he would not be easy to deal with, so as soon as the battle began, he immediately dashed forward and launched a barrage of relentless attacks, hoping to suppress him right from the start. This left Zhongxian with no choice but to dodge again and again. After all, he had to drag the battle on for a bit so as to not scare his next opponent away. That's infinitesimal maneuver, the crowd exclaimed in astonishment. Infinitesimal maneuver refers to the feat of dodging an opponent's attack by a hair's breadth each and every time. This allows one to conserve as much energy as possible, and it puts one in a better position to launch a counterattack. Of course, it is a double-edged sword as the slightest carelessness could spell the end. To think that World's Edge would actually be able to utilize such a high-level skill. That must have taken him decades of tough training, right? It would already be an incredible feat if one could achieve it within decades of training. I have a cousin who is determined to master infinitesimal maneuver. He has trained for 30 years in order to pull it off, but nevertheless, he still doesn't dare execute it in a real battle. This maneuver doesn't just test the precision of one's control, more importantly, it's a test of one's state of mind. Without absolute confidence in one's abilities, there is no way one would dare use this combat skill. Many cultivators among the crowd were already rendered speechless. In the ethereal hall, it was no exaggeration to say that those two combat skills were the marks of a true expert. Oblivious to the shock outside of the dueling ring, Zhongxian dragged the match on for roughly 10 blows before defeating this opponent with a swift strike. While waiting for his third opponent, Zhongxian could not help but nod in satisfaction at his own performance. It was tough, but I think I should have disguised my strength quite well. It is really stifling to have to exert only a 20th of my true strength like this, but it is also that I'll have enough opponents to last me to the 8th round. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian raised his head to face his third opponent. This is the English translation of Tianya. Chapter 1924 Sword Tossing. The third opponent was a young lady dressed in green, but she fell in defeat soon enough. The fourth opponent was an arrogant young man, but he too did not persevere beyond 10 moves. Seeing how he was staying in control, not scaring away the other challengers from fighting him in a duel, Zhong Xian nodded in contentment at his self-control. What he did not know was that, to the others, being able to spar with an expert of such caliber with just 500 ethereal coins was an invaluable opportunity for them, so there was no reason for them to pass on it. It could be said that they were earning a huge profit just by challenging Zhong Xian in a duel. It was not as if they could die in the duel, so they had nothing to lose. Senior, what's your opinion on that World's Edge? Outside the dueling ring, two figures leaning on a nearby pillar watched the live feed on the screen as they spoke. The person who was speaking was dressed in green, and he was hugging a sword. Despite his slackened posture, his eyes reflected a sharp sword intent that was at odds with his demeanor. The senior whom he was speaking to was also holding a sword in his hands, and the sword intent that he emanated was even more intense. It was clear that he was a skilled sword practitioner just by his presence. Both Zhenjiang City and Starlight City were under the jurisdiction of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, so there were many sword practitioners among the populace. In fact, even in the dueling ring, many of the challengers chose to wield a sword. The fact that he is able to alternate between feint and real attacks, as well as his ability to carry out infinitesimal maneuver, shows that the precision of his control over his strength has reached an incredible level, not paling in comparison even to me. There's no doubt that he's an expert. The senior nodded with a smile. However, he's still lacking in comparison to the disciples of our Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Those two skills are the elementary requirements one has to meet in order to officially become a disciple of our sect. Most menial disciples are capable of pulling that off. It's only in a remote location like this that people make such a huge fuss over this matter, the junior said. Junior Huang Dao, go and sign up for the dueling ring and show that fellow that there's a wider world out there, the senior instructed. Rest assured, if I can't make him admit within 3 moves, I'll spend the pay on the tab for our alcohol tonight and practice the transient swordsmanship from scratch once more, the junior known as Huang Dao replied with a confident smile. Don't drag the battle on for too long. We have yet to choose the new outer disciples and menial disciples, so we are very tight on time. Furthermore, our actions can be viewed as no different from bullying the local populace, and if Elder Lu learns of it, he'll surely reprimand us. As geniuses from a major sect, it was inappropriate for them to come to such a remote area and challenge the newbies in the area. This was no different from national players dropping by a local community club to challenge its team. It was beneath them to do something like that, and it would only sully their reputation. I understand. Huang Dao nodded as he walked toward the female attendant. It did not take long for him to be confirmed as Zhong Xian's 5th opponent. Look at Dire Swordsman's win ratio. He's only lost 5 matches out of 100. Isn't that insanity? What a ridiculous score this is. It seems like World's Edge has really met his match this time. Since he's holding a sword, this duel will likely be a sword duel. We've only seen World's Edge's expertise in hand-to-hand combat, we haven't seen his expertise with the sword. Every single competitor would have their past record in the dueling ring reflected on the screen. Dire Swordsman's feat of losing only 5 matches out of 100 swiftly raised a commotion among the crowd. The crowd initially expected it to be a one-sided battle just like those before, but the opinions were soon divided in now. Some believed that while World's Edge had displayed exceptional hand-to-hand combat skills, that was no indication that he would be good with a weapon in hand. Given his opponent's name, Dire Swordsman, and his score to date, he was likely an exceptional sword practitioner. Pick up your weapon. In the dueling ring, Huang Dao held onto his sword as he gestured to Zhong Xian. Very well. Without much hesitation, Zhong Xian flicked his wrist, and a sword from the nearby weapon rack swiftly flew into his hands. There were no tiers to the swords in the ethereal hall. They were only tools used to execute one's swordsmanship, so things such as weapon spirit did not exist within them. I'll give you 2 chances before I draw my sword. If you can't get close to me before then, I'll defeat you within a single strike. Huang Dao remarked calmly. As a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, He had his own honor to uphold. You aren't going to draw your sword right away? Zhong Xian, taken aback. With a frown on his forehead, he muttered, but you might lose your life if so. Audacious. Huang Dao exclaimed with a darkened face. Make your move, or else you won't have a chance to do so very soon. All right then. Zhong Xian sighed helplessly. He raised the sword in his hand and flicked it around casually, as if he was trying to get used to it. Without taking a single step forward, he flicked his finger all of a sudden. Wang! The sword flew out of his hand. Before he could even make his first move, he actually lost his grip over his sword. This was one of the greatest taboos in battle. Once a cultivator lost their weapon in battle, they would have to face their opponent barehanded, thus putting them in a disadvantageous position. That's too reckless. Is that fellow trying to admit defeat? The crowd watching the duel were stunned by what they were seeing. They had never expected to see such carelessness from the seemingly powerful World's Edge. Look, World's Edge has turned his body around. You're right. What does he mean by that? Is he trying to admit defeat just like that? Does he not have the slightest shred of sportsmanship in him? Amid exclaims of astonishment, the situation grew more and more ridiculous. On the stage, the young man known as World's Edge turned around and raised his hands after tossing out his sword, as if celebrating something. Was this a mark of surrender? Was he giving up after seeing Dire Swordsman's impressive record? The problem was, it was one thing for World's Edge to surrender, but why was he raising his hand so triumphantly? Did he view it as an honor or something? Standing on the opposite end of the stage, Huang Dao was taken aback by the situation as well. He had no idea what his opponent was up to or what was going on. Even if his opponent wanted to admit defeat, the latter should say so verbally instead of displaying such uncertain gestures. Just as he was deep in thought, his senior anxiously yelled, "Huang Dao, don't let your guard down. Be careful." That remark immediately brought Huang Dao back from his daze, and he quickly gathered his attention once more. However, before he knew it, the sword that his opponent had tossed ever so casually had already slowly made its way to him. The movements of the sword felt incredibly slow, giving one the feeling that it was floating quietly in the air. When it was just 3 meters away from him, the sword abruptly accelerated, bolting toward him as if a flash of light. Alarmed, Huang Dao immediately drew the sword in his embrace to protect himself, but before he could move, there was already a splitting pain in his head. Putong! His body fell uncontrollably to the ground as his consciousness swiftly vanished. The sword had already pierced his head and ended him. Who? Huang Dao's corpse swiftly dissipated into light particles before vanishing altogether, leaving only the sword that he had been holding earlier on the ground. Dying in the ethereal hall would not cause any harm to one's real body, but the ethereal token that one wielded would shatter and lose its function. Similarly, one's avatar and consciousness in the ethereal hall would vanish as well. In other words, dying in the ethereal hall was not completely without cost. Silence. There was a deathly silence that lingered in the area. Everyone stared in shock at the dueling ring before them with slackened jaws. They had expected to see an intense fight between Dire Swordsman and World's Edge, but as if a farcical play, the latter had tossed his sword out, and the former had gotten his head impaled. What the heck was that? Hula. After a moment of bizarre silence, roaring cheers filled the surroundings. While most of the spectators were unable to make sense out of what had happened in the earlier duel, it was as clear as day to them that World's Edge had won the duel. Long live World's Edge. I love you more than anything in the world. Dire Swordsman must have underestimated his opponent far too much. He was probably caught off guard by the sudden offense from World's Edge. I thought that Dire Swordsman would be a formidable figure, but who would have guessed that he's nothing but talk? To be impaled by a sword just like this, there's probably no one other than him, and to think that he actually had a win ratio of 95% out of 100 matches. Did he get such a record by rigging the system, or did he intentionally lose the battle so as to give us a good laugh? To all the spectators, the sword toss that Zhong Xian had performed earlier looked perfectly ordinary, so it was inexplicable to them how Dire Swordsman had ended up getting killed by it. Thus, there was only one possibility in their mind, and that was that Dire Swordsman was simply too weak. That's impossible. The senior, leaning against the pillar, hurriedly straightened his posture. He had noticed that something was amiss as soon as the sword was tossed. He could sense traces of sword intent behind the sword toss, which meant that it was a sword technique in itself. Still, was it really possible to kill Huang Dao so easily with the toss of a sword? The senior tried to recall the trajectory behind the sword toss, but the harder he tried to think about it, the more sweat that trickled down his forehead. To his astonishment, he was unable to map out the trajectory of the sword toss at all. It was as if everything had simply happened. His mind could process the start and the end, but everything in between was a blank. Even with his eye of discernment, he was unable to tell how the young man had managed to win with that single sword toss. "Do I have to fight him personally in order to tell?" the senior muttered as he clenched his fists tightly together. Most formidable swordsmanship would require a person to experience it themselves in order to know how powerful it truly was. Most likely, this move had also reached such a level. With that thought in mind, the senior unhesitatingly walked over to the registration counter and signed up for the duel. A moment later, he appeared in the dueling ring. "Soaring clouds." Zhong Xian read from the screen not too far away. He could not help but notice that his newest opponent had a sword in his grasp. It was just a moment ago that he had gotten rid of a swordsman when another one appeared before him. Did he accidentally poke a beehive or something? "I am Soaring Clouds, Yun Feiyang. It's both my nickname and my real name." Yun Feiyang nodded in response. Without any hesitation, he drew his sword, and a cold sheen appeared on the surface of the sword. "Pick up your weapon." Seeing that his opponent was as narcissistic as his previous opponent, Zhong Xian picked up the sword that he had used for the previous battle from the weapon rack once more before looking at his opponent. Yun Feiyang clasped his fist and requested, "Please use the same sword art as before." He wanted to experience the same sword art that had killed his junior in an instant earlier so that he could find a way to decipher it. As a sword practitioner, he could not stand the idea of a sword technique existing in the world that he was unable to make sense of. "The sword art that I used earlier?" Zhong Xian frowned. "That's right. Well, I guess that's fine." Zhong Xian sighed helplessly. He did not think that the sword toss that he had executed earlier could be considered a sword art at all. It was really just a casual toss of his sword, and there was no particular skill or deep conceptualization behind it. That being said, it was still a sword toss that harnessed the essence of the Heaven's Path sword art, and that was how it had pierced dire swordsman's head with impeccable accuracy. This fellow wanted to give the same menu a try. Did he think that his head was tough enough to survive the impact? Regardless of the reason behind his opponent's request, it really did not make much of a difference to him at all. He swung the sword in his hand a bit to get used to the grip before pointing it toward Soaring Clouds. "Who?" With a flick, the sword flew out of his hand. "It's coming." Yun Feiyang narrowed his eyes as he swiftly brandished his sword. In an instant, with the loud roaring of wind and swift afterimages of a blade, his silhouette was completely covered by his sword, preventing even the slightest droplet of water from getting to him. What formidable swordsmanship! How can he swing his sword so quickly? I can't even follow the movements of his sword with my eye. How can anyone breach a defense like this? The crowd below were astonished by Yun Feiyang's defense. His swordsmanship was so fast that it felt as if a light sphere of a radius of 2 meters had formed around him. Under such tight defense, it would be nigh impossible to harm him. Under the shocked gazes of the crowd, the tossed sword slowly advanced through the air to a distance of 3 meters away from Yun Feiyang. "Who?" With a loud whoosh of the wind, the sword abruptly vanished from sight. Unbeknownst to the crowd, it had pierced right through the light sphere formed by Yun Feiyang's swift sword. What's going on? Did he manage to stop it, or did he fail to stop it? The crowd were stunned to see that the sword had vanished, but the light sphere was still maintained around Yun Feiyang. With their eye of discernment, they could not tell what was happening on the stage. Before the crowd could finish their words, the light sphere abruptly popped, revealing a young man with a sword lodged in his head. The person in question had already breathed his last breath. Pang! The corpse collapsed to the ground and dissipated. Gasps of shock echoed through the crowd. Chapter 1925 Astonishment. In the City Lord residence of Starlight City, two young men were chatting with one another as they made their way toward a courtyard. Where did Yun Feiyang and Huang Dao go to this time? The young man on the left harumphed. They have been acting mysteriously for a while now, refusing to attend even our gathering. If they knew how many beautiful young ladies were there earlier, their guts would turn green with regret. He had a tall but skinny figure, reminiscent of a bamboo pole. One thing that was exceptionally eye-catching about him was the long arms that hung by his sides. Why would they regret it? They bought 2 ethereal token as soon as they arrived and assumed the identities of dire swordsmen and soaring clouds to challenge the locals, the young man on the right replied impatiently. He had a squarish face and a boorish voice. From his tone, it was clear that he disapproved of the actions of the two. They went to challenge the locals? Bamboo burst out laughing. They are disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, but they came here to challenge these countryside bumpkins? Has their pride been gnawed by dogs? What honor is there in that even if they win? I really don't know what they are thinking either. In the entire city, I reckon that only the Lord of Starlight City would be a match for us in our swordsmanship. Yet, they lowered themselves to challenge a bunch of ordinary folks. Are they suffering from an attention deficit or something? While shaking their heads, Squareface and Bamboo walked into the courtyard. As soon as they entered, they saw one of the people whom they had been talking about, Huang Dao, sitting before a stone table with his eyes in a daze. Did you have fun dominating the cultivators of Starlight City? Did they kneel down and beg the hero you are for mercy? Bamboo walked up to Huang Dao and teased him. Squareface patted Huang Dao's shoulder and asked, You have always been quite the gentleman. How many moves did you let them have? Seeing that it was those two, Huang Dao lowered his head in embarrassment as he drew circles on the table. With a voice that indicated that he could still hardly believe what had just happened, he said, I lost. As if serving as proof of his defeat, there was an ethereal token shattered into several fragments on the table. You were killed in the ethereal hall? Squareface and Bamboo widened their eyes in disbelief. They were disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. In terms of technique, they would never lose to any of their peers. Their combat skills should be enough to or any of the locals, but Huang Dao had actually ended up dying. The entire matter was so incredulous that they found it hard to accept. Did you wield your sword? Squareface asked. I did. But I still got defeated by a sword tossed right at my head. I didn't even have a chance to display my swordsmanship at all. Huang Dao felt like diving into the ground at this humiliation. You couldn't even execute a move before you were stabbed in the head. Those two felt as if they were mishearing things. Seeing that those two doubted his words, Huang Dao added, Senior Yun Feiyang was with me when it happened, but he isn't out yet. I reckon that he's challenged that fellow. You can ask him about it when he finally comes out. Feiyang was there as well. He's the one among the 4 of us who is most likely to become an inner disciple. Given his formidable prowess with the sword, he should be able to quell any opponent here with ease, Bamboo consoled. Following which, the 3 of them stood up to head over to the neighboring courtyard to see how it was going for Yun Feiyang. As soon as they walked in, they saw the person whom they had been full of praises earlier staring at a shattered ethereal token in front of him, just like Huang Dao had been doing. His expression was a mix of shock and confusion, and it seemed as if he had just been inflicted with severe mental trauma. With twitching lips, the crowd rushed forward and exclaimed, It can't be. You were killed, too? Yun Feiyang was the strongest of the 4 of them. If even he had been killed, how powerful must the person who had made the move be? I executed the boundless flowing water, but I still wasn't able to withstand his sword toss. That single move was more beautiful than anything I have seen in the world. Yun Feiyang's thoughts drifted off as he recalled the earlier sword toss. You executed the boundless flowing water? The crowd exclaimed in shock. That could be said to be the most advanced defensive swordsmanship among the outer disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. The swordsmanship would wrap one's surroundings in a dense layer of water vapor, reminiscent of flowing water. No matter how the opponent attacked, the defensive layer would either repel or redirect the attack. It could be said to be a move that no one of the same cultivation realm could break. Despite having executed the move, Yun Feiyang was still defeated in a single strike. Was the enemy really that formidable? More importantly, even though he had been so brutally killed, he still thought that the swordsmanship was beautiful. That intoxicated look on his face was as if he was passionately reminiscing about a lover. I would like to see that sword art with my own eyes. Feiyang, do you have any other ethereal token that I could use? After a moment of shock, Bamboo and Squareface found themselves trembling with curiosity. They were filled with anticipation to meet the person whose swordsmanship was superior to even that of Huang Dao and Yun Feiyang. I sent my men to purchase some ethereal tokens as soon as I awoke. We should be able to get some soon, Yun Feiyang replied. Every single ethereal hall had their own ethereal token. It was using the specific ethereal tokens that one could connect to the regional network. It did not take long for a servant to rush in with 8 ethereal tokens in hand. Every single of these ethereal tokens was worth tens of thousands of ethereal coins, but while it was a huge sum to Dan Xiaotian and the others, it was nothing of note to the disciples of the Ascendant Cloudsword Pavilion. Who? The 4 of them hurriedly connected to the Starlight City's ethereal hall before rushing toward the dueling ring. The 7th round, World's Edge is the winner. I wish to move on to the 8th round. As soon as they entered, they saw that World's Edge had won his 7th match. His 7th opponent was a renowned figure in the dueling ring, Windherder. Windherder was known for his exceptional light and swift movements, reminiscent of a breeze. At the very start of the duel, his silhouette had vanished from view, making it impossible for any other spectators to locate him. Yet, with a sudden upward kick into thin air, World's Edge had managed to strike the other party squarely in his crotch. And well, that had spelled the end of Windherder. Is there anyone who wishes to participate in the 8th round? Not a single person among the crowd replied. It was true that crossing blows with an expert could temper one's skills, but that was only if the gap in fighting prowess was not too huge. What was the point if they were just going to be finished off a second after going up onto stage? No one had that much money to waste on something futile. I'll do it. Bamboo quickly registered with the female attendant, and in a moment's time, he was already standing in the dueling ring. Seeing that there was an opponent, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. He had earned quite a substantial sum by winning 7 rounds consecutively, but it was still insufficient for him to purchase the Blue Sun pill. If no one accepted his challenge, he would really have some trouble trying to accrue sufficient money. Standing on the stage, Bamboo assessed the young man before him carefully. The other party looked extremely ordinary, there was nothing of particular note about him. How did the other party manage to defeat 2 of his seniors just like that? Another sword practitioner? Zhongxian asked when he saw the young man before him whipping out a sword. The Bamboo nodded as he drew his sword from his scabbard. Without any hesitation, he drove his sword forth. Based on Yun Feiyang and Huang Dao's accounts, it was clear that the person standing before him was a true expert. Thus, he decided to make the preemptive strike. Alas, before his sword could even come close to the opponent, there was a brilliant glow in front of him that was reminiscent of the dawn sun. Its radiance left him stunned for a moment. Peng! Another body collapsed weakly to the ground. Squareface's face twitched. He had thought that Huang Dao and Yun Feiyang had over-exaggerated the strength of their opponent, but from the looks of it, they had possibly even understated it. Yun Feiyang's defensive ability was one of the strongest among the outer disciples, but when it came to defense, Bamboo was definitely ranked at the top. Even so, he had still been defeated before he could even touch his opponent's sleeves. This could not even be described with terrifying. Huang Dao looked at Squareface and asked, "Do you wish to give it a go too?" "Aye." Squareface shook his head bitterly and said, "If even the 3 of you aren't a match for him, I don't think I'll fare any better than the rest of you. I'll pass." The price was not the problem. It was just that Bamboo and Yun Feiyang were already the 2 strongest individuals among the outer disciples, but they were not even close to being a match. He would just suffer the same fate as them if he challenged the other party. When did such a powerful expert appear in the ranks of Starlight City? "We must report this matter to Elder Lu," Squareface said. "You're right. Nodding in agreement, the three of them swiftly backed out of the ethereal hall and disappeared. Finally, I'm done with my eighth opponent. Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. He had worried that a lack of opponent could hinder his money-making, but fortunately, another fool had leaped forward at the last moment. There sure were plenty of generous people in the world. He waited in the dueling ring a little longer, but no one was willing to challenge him for the 9th round. Thus, he could only back out of the dueling ring in disappointment. He returned to the earlier store, and when he met the male attendant once more, the other party's attitude was completely different. Given the huge commotion that he had caused in the dueling ring, the male attendant had already heard of the matter. He had thought that the customer was just a naive poor bloke who thought too highly of his abilities, but it turned out that the other party was a true expert. Cold sweat poured down the male attendant's forehead as he feared that the customer before him would pick a grudge with him due to his earlier disrespect. However, looking at the amiable smile on the other party's face, seemingly not blaming him at all, he quietly heaved a sigh of relief. Elder World's Edge, you still have 105,500 ethereal coins on your card after purchasing a Blue Sun pill, the male attendant replied after processing the transaction. I still have more than 100,000 ethereal coins. Zhongxian was stunned. The returns of the duel should only total up to around 25,500 ethereal coins, so he should only have had 5,500 ethereal coins remaining. Where did the extra 100,000 come from? Elder, the opponents you faced in your 5th round and 6th round were equipped with weapons that they specially purchased. Due to their deaths, the swords were automatically sold back to the ethereal hall, and each of them was worth 50,000 ethereal coins. As you are the one who killed them, the sum was credited to your account, which is why you still have an excess 100,000. The male attendant replied. They bought their swords. But the specifications of their swords didn't appear to be any different from the ones provided in the dueling ring. It was not as if their swords were sharper or were imbued with some special properties, so why would they be so expensive? While the swords do have identical attributes to one another, their swords were inscribed with a unique design, and the color of their handles was different. Just the design itself makes them worth 50,000 ethereal coins each. Zhongxian's lips twitched upon hearing those words. So, it was possible to buy skins too, and the price was not cheap at all. Those darned capitalist gaming companies. Then again, there were plenty of vain people in the world, and those who had the money to do so often liked to set themselves apart from the masses. While they were unable to alter their cultivation and item attributes, they could at least set themselves apart through their clothes and weapons. How can I take out the pill that I have bought? Zhongxian asked. Elder World's Edge, you just have to communicate telepathically with your ethereal token after leaving the ethereal hall and activate the teleportation formation on it. The items you have bought will immediately be brought to you, the male attendant replied. That's convenient. Not expecting such convenience from this service, Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction. Having acquired what he needed, he quickly backed out from the ethereal hall and returned to the silent chamber. Crossing his legs, he placed the ethereal token in front of him and communicated with it telepathically. Wang. With a light buzz, a jade bottle appeared in front of him. Inside the jade bottle was the Blue Sun pill. I should be able to recover quickly after consuming it, Zhongxian thought as he uncorked the bottle and placed the pill on his palm. He was just about to swallow it when he suddenly felt a cold sensation on his palm. A gourd suddenly appeared and devoured the pill whole. The heck? Zhongxian's face immediately turned red. Chapter 1926 Dan Xiaoqian's Advance Men. This gourd was the very same Dongshu gourd which shamelessly chose to linger inside his dantian, refusing to leave at all. The last time, it leaped out and devoured the dragon blood he had acquired from Sovereign Chenling Hole, and the same thing was happening this time too. Of all times to appear, why did it have to appear now and eat the recovery pill which he just so needed so much at this instant? Did I offend you in my previous life or something? How in the world did I end up being plagued with a dastardly thing like you? With his body trembling uncontrollably, Zhongxian spat through gritted teeth, vomit. It. Out. Now. He grabbed the middle part of the gourd and exerted his strength angrily, But it was unfortunate that the amount of strength he could exert was limited due to his injuries. Already swallowed it. I can still poop it out if you want it though. The dongshu gourd shook its bottom gleefully. Poop your head. Zhongxian threw the dongshu gourd on the ground and stomped on it angrily twice before his anger finally subsided slightly. Let me warn you. If you dare interfere in my recovery once more, I'll throw you right into a pool of feces. You were injured by space-time turbulence, and its devastating power still lingers in your body. Do you know how long it'll take for you to recover using that kind of pill? The gourd snorted impatiently. Are you telling me that the blue sun pill isn't enough to heal my injuries? He couldn't check his own condition using the Library of Heaven's Path, and he was unable to drive his zhenqi to carefully check his current internal condition either. As such, he was unable to accurately discern how severe his injuries were. Duh. It can heal up normal injuries, but for those caused by space-time turbulence. Even if you were to eat a cart of them, it wouldn't make much of a difference at all, the gourd replied. That. Then what kind of medicine will I need? Zhongxian asked. He knew that there was something extraordinary about the dongshu gourd, so he decided to seek the latter's opinion this time around. Perhaps, something good might come out of this. You need pills that are specialized in treating wounds caused by space-time turbulence. However, those are incredibly rare and extremely expensive. It's impossible for someone like you to find it. However, you are in luck. As long as you bring me a few more of the earlier pill and let me have my fill, I'll tell you how you can cure your injuries. The gourd replied proudly. But before it could finish its words, Zhongxian had already struggled his way to the doorway of the chamber and shouted, Dan Xiaotian, bring a chopper over. A chopper? I have a gourd over here that needs to be sliced to two. If you don't have a chopper, an axe will do too. Zhongxian bellowed. As soon as an axe was delivered into Zhongxian's hands, he immediately brought it down on the dongshu gourd, smashing it furiously as if a person went berserk. Seeing that Zhongxian was serious about it, the gourd immediately surrendered. Fine, fine. I'll tell you how you can solve the problem. Actually, the reason why I want those pills isn't because I'm greedy at all. It's because my energy is weak, and I need to consume some pills in order to recover a little before I can heal your wound. Don't try to play games with me. Zhongxian glared coldly at the gourd as he pressed the tip of the axe against the gourd. Oh, of course not. Why would I? The dongshu gourd quickly replied. Shooting the dongshu gourd with one last vicious glare, Zhongxian returned back to the ethereal hall and spent all of his remaining 100,000 ethereal coins on buying 5 blue sun pills before returning. After swallowing the 5 pills, the dongshu gourd burped in satisfaction before instructing lazily, prepare a pot of water and boil it together with me. Drink the water 2 hours later, and your wounds will recover. You want me to drink your bath water? Zhongxian was stunned. Was this a legitimate healing method? Yuan, the dongshu gourd said as it lay lazily on the ground. Hurry up. If you aren't going to do it, I'm going to head back in to rest. Knowing that the darned dongshu gourd would really do as it had said, Zhongxian sighed deeply. He didn't really believe in the method which the dongshu gourd had provided him, but he had no better alternatives at the moment either. Thus, he decided to just give it a try. He swiftly instructed Dan Xiaotian, who was waiting outside, to bring a pot of water into the room. Soon enough, Dan Xiaotian came into the room and placed down a pot filled with water. He was slightly perplexed as to what his teacher was doing. First, his teacher asked for a chopper and an axe, and now, he wanted a pot of water. Was he intending to prepare a hot pot? With such thoughts in mind, the caring Dan Xiaotian immediately asked, Teacher, do you need lamb meat, fishball, or that sort? I can get someone to prepare it right away. Zhongxian. It took him quite a bit of effort to convince the overly welcoming Dan Xiaotian that he wasn't intending to having a hot pot. After he finally managed to send this 10th direct disciple of his out, he started a flame beneath the pot before tossing the dongshu gourd inside. The dongshu gourd didn't seem to be affected by the temperature at all. One moment, it would be swimming freestyle inside, and the next moment, it would dive underwater. It was as if it was having the time of its life. This ridiculous image made Zhongxian clasp his forehead as he wondered if he was really sane to actually heed the dongshu gourd's instructions. He was such an imposing figure on the master-teacher continent, but up here in the Azure, he felt like he was at the beck and call of the Dongshu God, and this made him feel extremely stifled within. To make things worse, he still hadn't figured out the true identity of this bizarre god. While the other cultivators were able to order their artifacts around, this fellow bolted right into his dantian as soon as they met, and it refused to come out no matter how he ordered it around. Furthermore, it had no hesitation in putting all sorts of stuff in its mouth. It felt like the Dongshu god would do him in as soon as he let his guard down, and the fact that he could do nothing about it made him feel deeply exasperated. He had no idea how he ended up getting stuck with this dastardly thing. 2 hours soon passed, and without requiring Zhongxian to fish the Dongshu gourd out from the pot, it dashed right out of the pot and shook its body to get rid of the water on its surface before bolting back into Zhongxian's dantian on its own accord. Heaving a deep sigh, Zhongxian carried the pot up and took a sip. It immediately sent a refreshing sensation across his body, alleviating the aches caused by his injuries significantly. It really works. Zhongxian's eyes lit up in excitement. He had already prepared an axe in case the Dongshu gourd had scammed him, but to his astonishment, it was really effective. The Dongshu gourd is an artifact related to space, so that might be the reason why it's able to heal the wounds caused by space-time turbulence. Zhongxian deduced. It didn't take him long to finish the pot of water, and his injuries were beginning to heal at a visible pace. In less than an hour's time, the bandages around his body unwrapped themselves and fell to the ground. My injuries are finally healed, but I haven't regained my zhenqi yet. Zhongxian thought. He was finally a sickly man no more, but his depleted energy hadn't been restored yet. Thus, he sat down on the ground once more and carefully felt the mercury-like spiritual energy around him. He opened up his acupoints and began taking it in slowly. Tzzzzzzzz. As the energy gushed into his body, he felt some weight pulling down his meridians, but fortunately, he didn't experience the same ripping sensation he felt previously. Is my body starting to adapt to this energy along with the recovery of my wounds? Zhongxian's eyes lit up in excitement. He was driving the normal Heaven's Path divine art at the moment instead of the reverse version. The last time he did so at the Kungsu domain, he nearly ripped his meridians apart. However, the recovery from his wounds seemed to have enhanced the resilience of his meridians, allowing him to take in the mercury-like spiritual energy without any trouble now. Gugugu. As the spiritual energy entered his body, Zhongxian swiftly circulated it around his body and converted it into zhenqi. At this rate, I should be able to make a full recovery within 3 days. Zhongxian quickly calculated his rate of absorption before heaving a sigh of relief. As a celestial saint and the world's teacher, the capacity of his zhenqi had reached an alarming level. Even with the Heaven's Path divine art and the mercury-like spiritual energy in the air, it would still take him 3 days to regain all of it back. However, as long as he had some zhenqi, he would be able to exert the strength of a Dimension Shatterer realm primary stage cultivator. In other words, there was no longer anything for him to fear in Shenjiang City. He continued cultivating for a while till he finally had 100 surges of zhenqi in his dantian before finally calling Dan Xiaotian in. As soon as Dan Xiaotian walked in, he noticed that his teacher's bandages had fallen to the ground, and the feeling of frailty he previously sensed from the other party had vanished. His eyes lit in excitement as he asked, "Teacher, you have recovered?" "Yuan, that's right. I want you to execute a punching routine for me right now. I'll determine the location for the GU in your body and eliminate it for you," Zhongxian said with a smile. With a nod of his head, Dan Xiaotian swiftly executed a punching routine. After taking a swift look, Zhongxian determined the resting location of the GU and placed his palm lightly on the spot. Hu! A surge of Heaven's Path zhenqi immediately gushed into Dan Xiaotian's body through his acupoints. In just a moment's time, it had already arrived at the Gu's hiding spot. Tzzzzzzzzzz. As if the arrival of a natural disaster, the GU that was lazing around a moment ago immediately fled in fright upon sensing the overwhelming energy coming its way. However, before it could get far, another surge of zhenqi gushed in from its path of escape. It was surrounded. Under the onslaught of the 2 surges of zhenqi, the GU was reduced to a heap of pus. Hong long long. As soon as Zhongxian forced the pus out of Dan Xiaoqian's body, the latter began inflating at a terrifying pace as if someone was blowing him, and his body swelled up like a balloon. "Teacher, what's happening to me?" Feeling the tremendous energy that was about to tear him apart from within at any moment, Dan Xiaoqian's face paled in fright. "I told you before. The reason why your cultivation hadn't risen despite the hard work you have put in over the past 10 years isn't because you aren't hardworking. Rather, it's because the spiritual energy you were absorbing has been stolen by the GU inside of you. Surely you can imagine the amount of energy it has stolen from you over the past 10 years. Zhongxian explained with a smile. It's all returned back to you right now, so it's a given that you would feel bloated with energy. Don't hesitate and absorb all of this energy with this cultivation technique I'm going to impart to you, Zhongxian said as he imparted a simplified version of the Heaven's Path divine art into Dan Xiaoqian's mind. There was no time for Dan Xiaoqian to carefully look through the manual he had just received, but he believed that his teacher wouldn't harm him. Thus, he began driving his zhenqi according to the instructions on the manual. As soon as he began to absorb the energy in his body, he realized that something was amiss. Typically speaking, when one was assimilating spiritual energy into one's own zhenqi, one would have to refine and adapt it to one's physical condition. However, the energy which he had obtained from the GU didn't require such steps at all. It was as if the energy belonged to him in the very first place, allowing him to control and absorb it with ease. You were the one who cultivated this energy in the first place, so it goes without saying that you would be able to drive them easily. Hurry up, and you might be able to finish before nightfall. Zhongxian explained with a smile. Yes. Dan Xiaoqian closed his eyes and focused his efforts on absorbing the energy in his body. Hong long long. His meridians were swiftly opened up, allowing energy to flow through his body with ease. His cultivation, which had stopped at Saint 6 Dan previously, began growing at an unbelievable pace. Saint 7 Dan, Saint 8 Dan, Saint 9 Dan. He had reached Saint 9 Dan in an instant, but his cultivation still wasn't showing any signs of settling down yet. He doesn't have any cultivation ordeal? Zhongxian frowned. Back on the master-teacher continent, those who had reached Saint 8 Dan would face the dimension-sundering ordeal, and those who had reached Saint 9 Dan would be struck by the macrocosm ascendancy ordeal. Back then, he spent quite a great deal of effort in order to overcome it. Yet, his 10th direct disciple was able to advance through the ranks without any problems at all. It could be because the heavens of the azure is much stronger. To them, Saint 8 Dan and Saint 9 Dan might be no different from Zhongsha realm and Zuansha realm, so it doesn't necessitate it to send down cultivation ordeals in response. Zhongxian figured. Considering how even ordinary citizens were able to reach Saint 9 Dan upon maturity in the azure, the heavens would probably die of exhaustion if they had to send down lightning bolts for these realms too. While Zhongxian's thoughts were wandering around the area, Dan Xiaoqian finally achieved a breakthrough to Great Sage. Introspective Convalescence Realm, Aureate Body Realm, Intuitive Impulse Realm. His cultivation raced all the way to Great Sage 3 Dan before slowing to a halt. The GU had consumed 10 years' worth of his hard work, and when it was finally released, it allowed him to soar through 6 realms in a single shot, reaching a level comparable to Shui Qin. Chapter 1927 Elder Lu Yun. Not bad. Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction. Just like Lu Chong, this direct disciple of his had a resolute heart. Putting everything aside, anyone else who had faced such hardships would have likely already given up on themselves and despaired at life. On the other hand, even though Dan Xiaoqian knew that he wasn't making any progress at all, he still persevered on and absorbed spiritual energy every single day. It was due to such willpower that allowed for his current accomplishment. Only those who had put in the effort would receive returns. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Teacher. The tremendous strength coursing through his body and the sensations he was finally feeling in his left leg made Dan Xiaoqian's eyes glisten with tears. Unable to hold himself back anymore, he kneeled down and cried. Despite his exceptional willpower, he was still a teenage child. He thought that he would die in humiliation after being rejected by his fiancée, but his teacher actually changed the trajectory of his entire life. Kindness begets kindness. You are the one who reached out a helping hand to me, and you deserve everything that you are receiving right now. Zhongxian replied with a smile. Since your cultivation has reached intuitive impulse realm, allow me to impart you with some protective battle technique. It was futile if Dan Xiaotian had powerful cultivation but no corresponding battle technique to go along with it. Take Xu Zhu for example. He had 200 years of inner energy but he was unable to use it at all, which brought him much trouble later on. I noticed that you have been practicing your swordsmanship, and it happens that I have created a sword art recently. I want you to give it a try and see if you are able to learn it. Ever since he was 10, Dan Xiaotian devoted his time equally to his cultivation and practicing his swordsmanship. While his mastery of swordsmanship was SOSO, he had long gotten used to the weapon, so there was no need for him to intentionally switch to another weapon anymore. Besides, he felt that Dan Xiaotian would be a good fit for the sword art which he had come up with earlier in the ethereal hall. It didn't take long for Dan Xiaotian to go through the sword art manual. There was only one move in the sword art manual, and that was tossing his sword. However, this move was much more complicated than it seemed. It required one to have precise control over one's strength in order to exploit the enemy's opening to bypass the enemy's defenses. Dan Xiaotian instinctively knew that the path to mastering this technique was fraught with difficulties. First and foremost, he needed to have a deep understanding of his enemy's strength and moves in order to launch a preemptive strike. Secondly, speed was also of key importance in this move. As difficult as the technique was, Dan Xiaotian was a person with great willpower. He put his all into every single practice throw he made, fearing that he would displease his teacher. Good. Zhongxian nodded in satisfaction. The direct disciple he had just accepted didn't come anywhere close to Zhao Ya, Yuan Dao, and the others in terms of his talents, but he surpassed them in his positive attitude and diligence. After practicing for 2 hours, Zhongxian noted that Dan Xiaotian had achieved a primary understanding of the technique before indicating that it was time for them to return back to their residence. Continue feigning to be crippled, Zhongxian sent a telepathic message over to Dan Xiaotian to remind him. Dan Xiaotian, who was walking normally a moment ago, immediately began limping once more, just like how he had been for the past 10 years. With the breakthrough in his cultivation, not only was his leg fixed, his height had also increased by a fair bit. While he still wasn't as tall as Zhongxian yet, he was already around the same height as his peers. Nevertheless, knowing the rationale behind his teacher's instructions, he intentionally slouched his body so as to appear shorter than he was. Those who weren't familiar with him wouldn't have noticed the difference in his condition from before. By now, the day had already darkened. When Elder Yi rushed over with a horse carriage, the first thing he noticed was the difference in Dan Xiaotian, and he froze in astonishment. He was just about to say something when he saw the third young master shaking his head. Knowing the meaning behind the latter's gesture, Elder Yi swiftly concealed his astonishment and joy. Nevertheless, he still quietly kneeled to the ground and kowtowed to Zhongxian several times before standing up once more and gesturing for the two to get onto the carriage. He was still thinking that the third young master was too kind to help another person despite the plight their clan was in, but who could have thought that it would be the latter's kindness who actually changed their lives? Old master, the third young master is finally well again. Elder Yi muttered quietly to himself as his eyes reddened. Wiping away the tears of joy brimming in his eyes, Elder Yi walloped the horse to quickly return back to the Dan clan. Shortly after they left, several shadows appeared by the corners of the street. They flitted through the darkness to track the movement of the carriage. Starlight City. Have you heard? A formidable expert has appeared in the ethereal hall today. He achieved 8 consecutive victories in the dueling ring, and eventually, he had no choice but to leave because there was no one who was willing to fight him. He won 8 rounds straight. Holy heavens! It must have been several hundred years since such a formidable expert appeared amongst us. Thinking about it, the cultivators of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion are currently recruiting outer disciples in our city, aren't they? Could they be the ones behind it? I doubt so. The cultivators of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion challenged that expert too, but they were utterly destroyed in a single move. Are you for real? How do you know? Of the 4 cultivators from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, there's one called Unveils, right? There was a character named Soaring Clouds in the Ethereal Hall, and his appearance is identical to that of Unveils. Furthermore, the move that he executed clearly belongs to the Sword Pavilion, but even so, his head was impaled within a single move, and he died on the spot. That expert is that powerful. What's his name? His name? Let me think. I think he's called World's Edge. What an excellent name. Vast and unfathomable. Just listening to the name is enough to send shudders down my spine. News spread swiftly. In less than 2 hours since Zhongxian left the Ethereal Hall, nearly all of the experts of Starlight City had already heard of his feat there. In an instant, the Ethereal Hall was filled with huge crowds of sword practitioners. They waited before the dueling ring, hoping for the expert known as World's Edge to appear once more so that they could witness his transcendental swordsmanship. Starlight City, City Lord Residence. This was where the esteemed guests from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion were assigned to stay at. In a vast courtyard, an old man was currently practicing his swordsmanship. His movements were extremely slow, seemingly devoid of strength. Yet, every single time he moved his sword, it felt as if the fabrics of the world were being strained. The air currents in the courtyard were stirred up under his movements, and they circled together to form a massive tornado. There were plenty of flowers and grass growing in the courtyard. As the air currents brushed by, there was surprisingly no damage to them at all. Yet, the dew that was above them seemed to vanish from sight. To get rid of the water dew without hurting the flowers and grass, this was truly an unbelievable level of control over one's strength. Who? The elder finally halted his swordsmanship and exhaled a mouthful of white smoke. The white smoke rose for over 30 meters before vanishing in the midst of the dark night. "Come in," the elder called out as he washed his hands clean with the bucket of water by the side of the courtyard. He had already noticed some visitors standing at his doorway a long time ago, and he knew that they were the juniors whom he had brought out together with him. However, as he was in the midst of his swordsmanship practice, he kept them waiting for a while. Jia, Yunfeiyang, Huang Dao, Bamboo, and Square-Faced walked in, and they hurriedly bowed down and greeted, paying respects to Elder Lu. The old man standing before them was no other than Elder Lu Yun, the man in charge of handling the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's recruitment. UN. Elder Lu Yun walked up to the stone table in the courtyard and sat down. "Speak. What's your reason for visiting me so late in the night?" This group of young men behaved as if a bunch of canaries being released from their cages as soon as they left the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. They were more eager than ever to avoid him usually, fearing that he would limit their freedom. Yet, on this very day, all of them were gathered together outside his courtyard. Something had to be up. Elder Lu, just earlier on, Yunfeiyang and Huang Dao went to the Starlight City's Ethereal Hall, and they fought with someone on the dueling ring. Square-Faced stepped forward and reported. Elder Lu's face immediately darkened in disapproval. "I can understand your feelings. Have learned so many new techniques, it's inevitable that you would want to boast about it. However, as disciples of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, you have to get your priorities straight. The reason why you are learning swordsmanship is to temper yourself and uncover the secrets of swordsmanship. Your diligence is the key for you to becoming an inner disciple and eventually bringing glory to the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion. Today, you might be proud of being a disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, but tomorrow, the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion could be proud of having a disciple like you. Let me tell you this straight, you are wasting your precious time on futile pursuit. If a professional gamer were to come to an ordinary internet cafe, it would be inevitable that he would like to show a hand or two to win some respect from the other gamers, but while such actions were thrilling, they didn't value add at all. One learned absolutely nothing out of those experiences. Hearing those words, Yunfeiyang and Huang Dao's faces reddened in shame. "I'll let you off the hook this time around, but this must never happen again, understood?" Elder Lu Yun instructed with an authoritative wave of his hand. At this moment, his eyebrows suddenly shot up as he realized something. In the past, when I brought other disciples out, such matters did happen too. While I don't approve of such actions, it isn't at odds with the rules of our sect. Did the 4 of you get into some sort of trouble? Yun Feiyang fidgeted a little in embarrassment as he replied, Elder Lu, when I went onto the dueling ring in the ethereal hall earlier, I executed the boundless flowing water against my opponent. You executed the boundless flowing water? You would need such a move to defeat the cultivators of Starlight City. It appears that you have met an expert. Elder Lu Yun was slightly stunned for a moment before he picked up a teapot and filled his teacup. I created this move unintentionally while I was observing a flowing river back in my younger years. While its conceptualization is simple, it harnesses a fragment of the laws of nature, making it extremely difficult to cultivate. It's impressive that you are able to execute it. Of course, the opponent who is able to force you into making this move must be quite skilled too. Since you have executed this move, I trust that you have cornered your opponent and forced him to admit defeat. Elder Lu Yun said with a smile before sipping on his tea. He was extremely confident of the sword art he had created. The cultivators of Starlight City were bound to be scared into submission upon encountering this move of his. Seeing that Elder Lu Yun had gone on another one of his narcissistic streaks, Yun Feiyang's awkwardness intensified. With hesitation in his voice, he said, when I executed the move, the opponent, he impaled my head with a throw of his sword. Pu. Elder Lu spat a mouthful of tea at the face of Squarefaced, causing his face to appear larger than ever. With widened eyes, Elder Lu Yun asked anxiously, what did you just say? At the very start of the duel, I executed the boundless flowing water, but that fellow tossed his sword toward me, and the sword passed through the defense of the boundless flowing water and pierced my head, causing me to die on the spot. Yun Feiyang explained once more. This. How is this possible? Elder Lu Yun was on the verge of going crazy. Such a powerful defensive sword art was actually unraveled by the single toss of a sword. Was this for real? Does that person specialize in offense? Seeing that Yun Feiyang didn't seem to be lying, Elder Lu Yun questioned on. Yuan, it seems so. His offensive prowess is quite formidable. Huang Dao replied with an affirmative nod. Till now, he was still a little traumatized at how easily he was killed. If he were to meet that person in real life. If that's the case, it might be because you have used the wrong move to counter him. While boundless flowing water is a defensive sword art, blindly attempting to defend against a determined assault is not a wise move. You would eventually reveal an opening for the enemy to exploit. Hearing that they had only lost in the face of exceptional offensive prowess, Elder Lu Yun slowly regained his calm. Against such an opponent, you have to grasp the initiative and make the first move so as to corner the enemy with your overwhelming momentum. If you had used the meteor steps in parallel with my bamboo-shattering swordsmanship, you should have been able to turn the tables around and defeat him easily. Regarding that, Elder Lu, I have crossed hands with that person too, and I executed the meteor steps together with the bamboo-shattering swordsmanship right from the start. Bamboo said with a reddened face. These were the two moves he executed against World's Edge as soon as the duel started. And of course, it went without saying that those two moves were created by Elder Lu Yun too. How is it? Did you overwhelm him with absolute might and defeat him in an instant? Elder Lu Yun asked as he took another sip of water. Bamboo scratched his head and replied, well, before I could even get to him, he had already head-shotted me. Pu. This time, Squarefaced's clothes were drenched too. His resentful expression made his face look larger than ever. Regardless of whether you went on the offensive or defensive, you were still defeated by the other party in a single move. Elder Lu Yun dropped his teacup as he rose to his feet in astonishment. Shu Zhu is a character in Jin Yong's Demigods and Semidevils. He was a monk from Shaolin Temple, but by sheer coincidence and luck, he deciphered a Go formation and inherited the strength of a legendary expert. However, as he had never really practiced martial arts before, he was unable to tap into his strength properly. Chapter 1928 Sharpshooter. Let me take a look at the video from the ethereal hall. Knowing it was impossible for all four disciples to have the guts to band together with one another and lie to him, Elder Lu Yun instructed. Usually, he wouldn't have even be bothered to enter the ethereal hall of a remote place like this, But with 3 out of 4 of the disciples that had come with him been sniped so easily, not to mention that they had been using his technique, he had to take a look for himself. If that person was a talented sword practitioner, he would have earned merit for himself bringing that person back, considering that he was the elder in charge of recruitment. After taking out the ethereal tokens he had purchased, the 5 of them entered the ethereal hall and swiftly purchased the videos of their earlier battles. The ethereal hall would record down all of the matches on the dueling ring for sales and reference purposes. It didn't take long for them to finish looking through the battle between the 3 disciples and World's Edge. Each battle lasted for barely a few seconds. After all, Elder Lu Yun swiftly came to understand the reason behind their defeats, and he shook his head in bitter disappointment. The other party saw through the flaws in your moves, and that's why he managed to defeat all of you so easily. Hearing those words, Yun Feiyang and the others hung their heads in shame. They knew that it was likely to be something of that sort too. But no matter what they did, be it to launch the preemptive strike, dodge, or fend against it, as long as they were in face of that tossed sword, they found that there was no correct countermeasure they could have taken that would allow them to turn the tables around. The move looked simple enough, consisting of just a sword toss aimed toward the head, but those who had stood in the dueling ring against World's Edge knew that it was much more than that. Yun Feiyang's boundless flowing water is executed exquisitely, but there's a huge problem in the fluidity of his movements. Those who know the slightest bit about swordsmanship would be able to see through the flaws and exploit it. As for Hu Bin's meteor steps and bamboo-shattering swordsmanship, while it appears powerful on the surface, the problem is that you are unable to bring out even a tenth of its true prowess once your power has been scaled down to Saint One Dan. Given so, it's inevitable that the 2 of you would be killed so easily. Elder Lu Yun harumphed coldly. Tonight, I expect you all to practice those 2 sword arts and movement art 100 times. If you were to miss even a single time, don't bother coming to find me ever again. Yes, Elder Lu. The 4 of them nodded solemnly. Also, I want you to keep a close lookout at the ethereal hall. If World's Edge appears again, inform me right away. Placing his hands behind his back, Elder Lu Yun emanated an air of indomitability as he spoke. Does he think that he'll get away so easily after harming the disciples of our Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion? How can there be such a convenient thing in the world? Even if he's a good bud, I'll first grind his arrogance down and let him know that the swordsmanship of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion is far more profound and advanced than what he can ever imagine. Yes, Elder Lu. Hearing those words, Yun Feiyang and the others heaved a sigh of relief. Without a doubt, Elder Lu had chosen to make a move personally against that person. While Elder Lu Yun might only be one of the minor elders in charge of recruitment and overseeing the training of the outer disciples, his comprehension of swordsmanship was not to be underestimated. Putting aside everything else, even the 4 of them combined wouldn't be a match for Elder Lu Yun when their cultivations had been suppressed to the same level. With him making a move, World's Edge was bound for a trip of misfortune. And as reality would have it, it wasn't Elder Lu Yun and the others who were waiting in anticipation for World's Edge's appearance. The entire Starlight City and the experts from the 3rd-tier cities beneath it had all heard of the news, and they were excited to see what would happen when that legendary man appeared once more. He defeated Junior Yun Feiyang in a single move. Interesting. In the City Lord residence of Shenjiang City, sitting in front of a Nora wood desk, a grey-robed young man had just heard of the news too, and a gleam flickered in his eyes. This was the same grey-robed young man whom Zhong Xian had met previously at Hongyang Market. He was the first senior of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion's outer disciples, Hu Jianghe. Help me keep a close eye at the ethereal hall. As soon as World's Edge appears, no matter what I am doing, inform me right away. A countryside bumpkin actually thinks that a simple toss of a sword can also be considered as swordsmanship. Let me give him a lesson of what true swordsmanship is. Hu Jianghe stood up as sword intent flared from his presence. Wang. A sudden burst of sword chi shot out from him and sliced the thick table before him into 2. Get me a new table. Hu Jianghe commanded imposingly before walking loftily out of the room. You wench. Softer. Pa. A resounding slap echoed in the air as Xueqin glared at the maid whom she had just struck with fury in her eyes. She instructed this wench to apply medicine for her, but the latter actually dared to inflict pain on her. Unforgivable. Second young mistress, please have mercy on me. The maid quickly kneeled on the ground and cried out desperately. Scram. Xue Qin kicked the maid in the chest before ordering the guards to throw her out of the room. After which, she turned around and looked into the mirror, only to see her beautiful face was hopelessly swollen. Her body trembled with rage as deep resentment flowed out of her. Glaring at her reflection furiously, she spat with clenched jaws, Dan, Xiao, Tian. It was because she was engaged to a trash that she had been mocked by her peers ever since she was at a younger age. It wasn't easy for her to win Senior Huojiang's appreciation and become a menial disciple of the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, but everything was ruined just because of that blasted Dan Xiaotian's interference. Was that bastard really that unwilling to see her getting along well? If not for the marriage agreement, he would have already been dead by now. He should learn to be grateful. Yet, instead of repaying her grace, he colluded with that mummy and had Senior Hua slap her in public. Her honor was completely shattered today. There was no way she could forgive him for this. Dan Xiaotian must die. That bandaged mummy must die too. And that servant, Dan Yi, must die as well. Xue Qin cursed viciously. At this moment, Xue Chen walked in with a confident smile on his lips. Rest assured, second young mistress, I have everything in my grasp. I promise you that they won't live to see sunrise. That would be for the best. Xue Qin replied. She looked into the mirror once more and asked, Teacher, do you think that this will leave a scar on my face? Will Senior Hua lose interest in me and despise me if I were to become ugly? Second young mistress, there's no need to worry. Senior Hua has just sent someone to deliver this healing cream over. Your swelling will swiftly subside after applying it on your face, Xue Chen replied as he passed a jade bottle over. It's from Senior Hua. Xue Qin's eyes lit up in agitation. It seems like he still has feelings for me. From her tone, it was obvious that she was more concerned about her looks and whether she would be despised by Senior Hua than Dan Xiaotian's life. Da da da. The carriage raced through the streets. After stepping out of Hongyang Market, Elder Yi could feel an inexplicable pressure in his chest. It felt like an omen that danger was right upon them. It was precisely due to such a feeling that he didn't dare to rest at all. He forced the horse to gallop toward the Dan clan residence as quickly as it could, hoping to find security there. Su su su. At this moment, a series of piercing hum echoed in the air as countless arrows rained from both sides of the street. Ordinary arrows couldn't hope to harm a saint cultivator, but these arrows were the specially crafted feather arrows. Every single one of them carried might comparable to Saint 9 Dan experts. With so many of them raining down from above, not even great sage experts would be able to stand their ground. Teacher. Dan Xiaotian knew that this was a clear indication that the enemies had begun making their move. With clenched fists, he looked at the young man beside him for guidance. Don't get distracted. What you have to do now is to comprehend the swordsmanship which I have imparted to you. Zhong Xian instructed calmly. Yes, teacher. Knowing that his teacher had a solution in mind, Dan Xiaotian closed his eyes and concentrated on the teachings his teacher had imparted to him. Just like that, his comprehension of the sword improved at a tremendous rate. How dare you harm the third young master? I'll pit my life against you. Elder Yi didn't hear the conversation between those two. As soon as he saw the sky filled with arrows above him, he couldn't hold himself back anymore. With a furious roar, he raised his whip and flicked it around the air, hoping to fend off the arrows that threatened to hurt Dan Xiaotian. He knew that even though his cultivation was at Saint 9 Dan, his physical prowess had already declined due to the stress and hardships he had to face while protecting Dan Xiaotian over the years. Furthermore, he had also sustained significant injuries during the tragedy back then. It would already be a remarkable feat if he could exert strength comparable to a Saint 8 Dan in his current state. Against the sky filled with arrows above him, it was likely that he wouldn't even last a couple of seconds. But so what? Perhaps, as long as he could buy that much time, the third young master might be able to get away alive. Woo! As if possessed, Elder Yi stood up and flung the whip around, but the sheer weight behind the arrows swiftly knocked the whip out of his hands. Desperate, he leaped up to the top of the carriage, hoping to use his body to knock away as many arrows as he could, but it was at this moment that the queerness began. The arrows that were darting right toward the carriage somehow magically brushed by the carriage. Despite their close proximity, none of them struck the carriage or the horse galloping in front. Are they really assassins? Elder Yi blinked his eyes in confusion. He thought that they were doomed, but who could have thought that none of the arrows from the assassins would strike the target at all? It was as if they were intentionally trying to miss the carriage. How could there be such amateurish assassins in the world? Elder Yi wasn't the only one who was stunned. Even the head of the assassins was starting to doubt if what he was seeing was real. "What the hell are you lot doing? Aim properly," the head of the assassins hollered. "Roger that, boss." The assassins swiftly loaded their bows once more and shot out another rain of arrows. Woo! But the same mystical sight happened yet again. As if they were blinded, the arrows curved ever so slightly and circumvented the carriage. Pooha! 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 This time, the assassins weren't as lucky as before. The arrows coming from both sides ended up striking the assassins on the opposite end of the street. With arrows impaled in their heads, they looked no different from porcupines. "I don't believe that we can't hit the carriage. Continue shooting," the head of the assassins ordered. And again, another bunch of assassins collapsed to the ground from being struck by too many arrows. "The hell? Continue. Boss, we mustn't. At this rate, all of us will be killed before we can even strike that carriage," a subordinate cried out desperately. Snapping out of his berserk state, the boss of the assassins finally took a look around him and realized that almost all of his subordinates had been killed. Every single one of them had an arrow precisely lodged into their heads. The various groups they had spread out in the area had also gone utterly quiet. It seemed like they had been thinned out by the earlier shootings too. "I have ordered you all to strike the carriage and destroy Dan Xiaotian. Why the heck are you all shooting our own people?" Trembling with rage, the boss nearly went frenzied with anger. Unable to take it any longer, he snatched a bow from his subordinate and aimed directly at Elder Yi's heart before releasing the arrow. As a great sage Dan cultivator, the arrow that he shot out carried destructive might. It whizzed across the air as if a shooting star. Noticing the swiftly approaching arrow, Elder Yi narrowed his eyes as his body stiffened in fear. But once again, the arrow simply brushed him by. Ah! There was a cry of agony, and another one of whatever survivors there were left on the other side died. What the heck is going on here? The boss of the assassins loaded his bow once more, but this time, instead of aiming at Elder Yi, he shot toward the sky. Ah! 2 breaths later, another cry of agony sounded as a survivor fell victim to his arrow. The boss of the assassin clutched his hair in a frenzy. He turned to his back and shot 2 arrows, and there were 2 cries of agony, marking the end of another 2 assassins. What the hell is this sorcery? The boss of the assassins was on the verge of losing the last shred of his sanity. It was because he was unskilled in archery that he didn't bring a bow over. When in the world did he become such a formidable sharpshooter that he could strike his own people no matter where he was aiming at? More importantly, there should have been no one behind him, but somehow, the arrow did a perfect U-turn and accurately lodged itself into the head of one of his subordinates. Something was really wrong here. Chapter 1929. The culprit is the horse, stop shooting. Charge at them instead. The boss of the assassins finally threw his bow to the ground and ordered. If they were to continue shooting, all of them would definitely lose their lives. Since that was the case, they would be better off charging over to kill them. Voila! Upon hearing the order, the remaining survivors amongst the band of assassins whipped out their weapons and leaped out from their hiding spots. Looking at the few figures who jumped out, the boss of the assassins felt as if someone had plunged a dagger into his heart. In order to ambush Dan Xiaotian, he had mobilized over 30 men, and he thought that it would be a walk in the park to assassinate a cripple like Dan Xiaotian. Who could have thought the rain of arrows would end up thinning out his men instead? Right now, he only had 8 subordinates left, and 2 of them had arrows sticking out of their heads. They were wobbling weakly from side to side with each step they took, and blood was trickling profusely from their heads down to the ground. What a bitter sight this was. The hell? If he knew that Dan Xiaotian was such a difficult opponent to deal with, he would have never accepted this deal. They were bandits living outside the city, and earlier this afternoon, someone visited them with a huge sack of ethereal coins, requesting them to eliminate Dan Xiaotian. They thought that it would be a minor issue, but it turned out to be the worst mistake he had ever made in his life. After the huge death toll on their end, he couldn't allow himself to retreat anymore. By hook or by crook, he was determined to complete this mission. Chop those scoundrels in the carriage into minced meat. The boss of the assassins hollered angrily. Hula. The remaining 8 assassins immediately dashed right for the carriage. You'll have to step across my body if you wish to kill the third young master, Elder Yi hollered. He was about to jump down from the carriage, but before he could do so, another figure had made a move ahead of him, the horse. It was as if the horse was angered by the earlier rain of arrows too. Without any hesitation, it freed itself from the carriage and dashingly leaped over a distance of 10 meters to stand before the 8 bandits. Peng! It kicked out its hooves and struck the 2 fellows with arrows lodged onto their heads. This strike pushed the arrow deeper into their heads, bringing them instantaneous deaths. The heck! The remaining 6 bandits were frenzied. To think that a horse would actually kill 2 of their comrades. If anyone were to learn that they were from the same group, they would die of shame. A short and stout middle-aged man whipped out his saber and dashed forward, intending to slice the horse into 2. But before his strike to reach, the horse suddenly kicked its hooves forward once more. Pa! Crack! It struck the middle-aged man's crotch squarely, and the sound of an egg shattering echoed loudly in the surroundings. The middle-aged man immediately kneeled to the ground as his face scrunched up so tightly that it could crush even a fly in between the folds. Hoo 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 hoo! While the middle-aged man was being incapacitated, the remaining 5 people swiftly closed in on the horse, intending to deal it a fatal blow. However, as if expecting their moves, the horse took 2 steps back to create some distance before kicking its hooves up once more. Peng peng! Yet another 2 more bandits collapsed to the ground while grabbing their severely injured crotches. That rascal! The remaining 3 bandits went insane. It was one thing for their arrows to mystically miss the targets, but it was as if this horse had suddenly been possessed or something too. Their legs trembled in fear as they slowly backed away fearfully, hoping to make their escape. But before they could run away, the horse abruptly charged right at them. Pada! 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 In a moment's time, the remaining 3 bandits were incapacitated too. After which, the horse sent a powerful kick to each of the kneeling bandits, and in less than 2 breaths, all 8 of them were tragically killed, leaving only the boss of the assassins. Pada! The whip in Elder Yi's hand fell to the ground as he was shocked silly by the sight he had just witnessed. Did I really use a whip to strike this fellow earlier? Elder Yi felt a cold breeze breathing on his crotch as he stared at the horsewhip on the ground with a look of fright, not daring to pick it up at all. If the horse were to remember the grudge and give him one good kick. Well, he was old and couldn't really have children anymore, but he still valued his manhood as much. It was the kind of thing that you would rather retain even just for decoration than to have it shattered. Looking at the corpse and the ground once more, Elder Yi couldn't help but shudder. These assassins were mostly at Saint 9 Dan, and some of them had even reached Great Sage 1 Dan. Yet, they were all destroyed by a horse just like that. How in the world did something as ridiculous as this even happen? When did the horse he took care of every day become such a formidable creature? You! On the other hand, the boss of the assassins nearly went insane upon seeing this sight. I don't believe that a great bandit like me who have ruled the Shenjiang city for more than 10 years would lose to a mere horse. Trembling with rage, the boss of the assassins roared furiously and charged forth. In response to his aggression, the horse also galloped forth furiously as well. Who? But before the 2 could collide with one another, the boss of the assassins suddenly conducted an abrupt sidestep, allowing him to bypass the horse. In the next moment, he was already right before the carriage. As expected of a great Sage 2 Dan expert, his reflexes were truly worthy of praise. The earlier attack was just a feint. His main goal all along had been to get rid of Dan Xiaotian. As long as Dan Xiaotian was dead, he could claim the rewards to the mission, and with time, he would be able to build his band up once more. After the deaths of so many of his subordinates, he couldn't allow himself to walk out of here without earning anything. Shit, that despicable scoundrel. Neither Elder Yi nor the horse expected the boss of the assassins to be so determined to get rid of Dan Xiaotian even after all that had happened. It was already too late by the time they realized it. They couldn't make it in time to save Dan Xiaotian anymore. Su. A saber pierced right through the windows of the carriage. If Dan Xiaotian's guard was down, this attack could very well claim his life. Hong Long. But at this crucial moment, the incomprehensible happened. As if a fairy tale came to life, the carriage suddenly leaped up and crushed the boss face with its wheels. Peng. That unexpected heavy strike caused the boss of the assassins to bleed profusely. Taken aback, he immediately attempted to retreat, but before he could make a move, the carriage was already charging in his direction. Bam! 7 molars were smacked out from his mouth as his saber flew into the distance. The boss of the assassins quickly scrambled back to his feet and backed away from the carriage warily, but the latter didn't seem to have any intentions of letting him get away. Using its handles as a pair of hands, it seemed prepared to pummel him into the ground. What the hell is this? The boss of the assassins rubbed his eyes in disbelief. The arrows didn't hit. Fine, there might be some kind of experts altering the trajectory of the arrow, I'll accept that. The horse suddenly became so powerful. Fine, it might be because it had just undergone some kind of evolution or became a tamed beast. I can accept that too. But a non-living carriage suddenly leaping around and executing martial arts as if it was the most powerful existence in the world, how in the world am I supposed to accept something as ridiculous as this? Is there some kind of ghosts or supernatural forces behind this? I need to get away. Fearing that he would encounter more unbelievable sights remaining here, he quickly took out a jade token and crushed it. Peng! A brilliant glow of light burst forth, raising dirt from the ground. Swiftly, an energy barrier formed around him. As a bandit, the most important skill he needed to have was not plunder or murder. It was self-preservation. Before engaging in any operations, he needed to identify all plausible escape routes and prepare protective measures beforehand in case anything went awry. It was in view of this that he spent a hefty price to purchase this jade token. It had the ability to fend off even the attack of an ancient sage cultivator, allowing him to survive any danger. Su. As soon as the energy barrier was formed, the boss of assassins immediately leaped toward one of the towering walls by the side to make his escape. While he was on his escape, he didn't even dare to turn around to see if anyone was on his tail. He was afraid that he would see something that would scar him for life if he were to just so look back. At this point, not even death in the hands of an expert scared him that much anymore. However, if he were to die to a horse or a donkey, he didn't think that he would be able to rest in peace. The boss of the assassins sprinted with all of his might until he was finally out of breath. Perhaps it was the jade token working its charms, or that the enemy didn't bother chasing him at all. When he finally turned around, there was no one behind him. Patting his chest rapidly, he heaved a sigh of relief. Damn it, I have really been done me in this time around. When he first accepted the mission, the other party told him that it was a minor issue, and that he would be able to get rid of the target easily. Of course, someone as wary as him wouldn't just listen to a one-sided view of the story, so he specially investigated Dan Xiaotian and confirmed that there wouldn't be any problems before taking on the task. He never expected that things would end like that. Dan Xiaotian was indeed not formidable at all, but his horse and carriage were freakishly powerful. How was he supposed to complete such an assassination? He swiftly fled outside of the city, to where he had agreed to meet the client after the job was done. He lit up a bonfire and waited patiently for the other party to appear. There was no way he would be letting this matter go so easily. Elder Yi's body had been so tense throughout the entire encounter that when everything ended, his body simply suddenly slackened and fell to the ground. He felt like he had experienced a lifetime of shock in just a single night. He was almost convinced that the assassination from that bunch of assassins would spell their end, but as if some sort of sorcerer was on their side, their horse and carriage suddenly came to life. It was as if a fairy tale. Without having to make a move, the problem just somehow resolved itself. Was there anything as exaggerated as that in the world? While he was in the midst of his shock, The horse suddenly galloped back to the carriage, secured itself to it, and with its head tilted upward, it began galloping back to the Dan clan residence once more. Watching the horse in front of him, Elder Yi's hands trembled in horror. For such a fearsome horse to be pulling their carriage. Even if you want to pull our carriage, I wouldn't dare to even think of driving you around. Master Zhong. Elder Yi turned his head backward and asked. In truth, he already had an answer in his mind. The horse and carriage had been perfectly normal for all of these years, and the only thing that had changed from back then was Zhong Shen's appearance. We'll talk once we're back at the Dan clan residence, Zhong Shen's voice echoed quietly from within the carriage. He knew that someone would ambush them on their way back, so he had the horse tamed and the carriage enchanted when he got onto the carriage earlier. Even ordinary people were able to reach Saint Nine Dan without cultivating, let alone horses who boasted stronger constitutions than humans. Upon maturity, they already wielded strength on par with great Sage 1 Dan cultivators. However, their intelligence was slightly lacking, and no one had been able to communicate with them thus far, which made it nigh impossible to tap into their strength in battle. But as long as one could tame the horse and establish mental communication with it, one would be able to get it to do whatever one wanted to. Putting aside killing those assassins, were it not for the boss running fast enough, it would have been able to destroy him as well. Yes. Suppressing his excitement, Elder Yi turned his head around and watched the carriage racing through the streets to return back to the Dan clan residence. The bonfire blazed for quite a while before two figures suddenly approached. One of them was a middle-aged man. The boss of the assassin recognized him to be the one who had entrusted him with the mission to assassinate Dan Xiaotian back then. As for the other figure, while her face was masked, it was obvious to see that she was a young lady based on her physique, and a very beautiful one at that. How is it? Have you accomplished the mission? The middle-aged man got straight to the point. This middle-aged man was no other than the head instructor of the City Lord Manor, Xue Chen, and the young lady beside him was, of course, Xue Qin. Typically speaking, such matters wouldn't require her involvement, but after the humiliation she had suffered, she wished to see with her own eyes the heads of Dan Xiaotian and that mummy who dared to cross her. Thus, she decided to follow Xue Chen here after concealing her appearance with a mask. Accomplished the mission? Look here, don't you think that you have some explaining to do? Is this what you mean by a simple task? The boss of the assassins roared in anger. What do you mean by that? Xue Chen frowned. Is your group so weak that you can't even get rid of a severely injured old man and a cripple? Weak my ass, the head of the assassins spat. More than 30 of my brothers have died in the earlier operation. If not for my fast reflexes, I would have died there and then too. How do you intend to compensate me for my loss? More than 30 of your men died. Xue Qin widened her eyes in disbelief. Are you telling me that Dan Xiaotian's group single-handedly got rid of all of you? Does he wield such capabilities? It isn't him, the head of the assassins harumphed. Who else could it be then? Xue Chen asked doubtfully. He had investigated Dan Xiaotian carefully, and the latter shouldn't have any backing in Shenjiang City. Given the strength of this band of bandits, they should be able to deal with him easily. These bandits were a pain to deal with when they plundered the merchants coming into Shenjiang City, so why would they suddenly become so inept now when their target was just a mere Dan Xiaotian? The head of the assassins spat on the ground and bellowed wrathfully, the one who killed my brothers is their horse. No, that's not it. Their carriage as well. Xue Chen and Xue Qin. Chapter 1930 Cao Chengli's astonishment. Xue Chen was confident in his plan. He had no doubt that the band of bandits would be able to eliminate the fallen remnants of the Dan clan and cleanse the humiliation which the second young mistress had suffered. But what happened instead was the death of the bandits, and even its head seemed to have lost his mind. The ones that killed you were the horse and the carriage? How impressive. Why don't you add cannon and elephant into the list too? Do you think that we are playing Chinese chess over here? Are you trying to play games with me here? I'm asking you, who is the one who killed your men? Answer my question, Xue Chen bellowed. Haven't I already answered your question? It's a horse and a carriage, the head of the assassins roared. Horse. Carriage. Xue Chen and Xue Qin were more confused than ever. Dan Xiaotian's horse and carriage possess strength comparable to great sage One Dan cultivators. They easily trampled my subordinates to death. Furthermore, it seems like there was some kind of supernatural force helping them. We shot out many arrows, but none of them struck the target. As ridiculous as the story sounded, the boss of the assassins still recounted everything that had happened earlier. A horse and a carriage that knows martial arts. Xue Chen's face turned livid as he felt as if his intelligence was being challenged over here. He grabbed the boss by his collars and pulled him up into the air. "You rascal, I don't have the patience to be playing games with you. Even if you wish to back out from our request, you owe me at least a rational explanation." You think that I'm lying to you? The boss was on the verge of going insane. Why did no one believe the words he was saying? He was being perfectly honest over here. Enough. Here is an ethereal card, and there are 500 ethereal coins inside. That should compensate you for your losses. Xue Chen couldn't be bothered to waste his time with this deranged fellow, so he tossed a card over nonchalantly. "You are only going to give me 500 ethereal coins for the lives of 30 of my brothers." The face of the boss twitched. This bit of money wasn't even enough to replenish the arrows and bows that they had used in the operation. "You didn't complete the mission we agreed on. I'm already being very magnanimous here to give you 500 ethereal coins. Now, scram from my sight right now, or I swear you won't be getting a single coin out of me anymore." Xue Chen spat with narrowed eyes. "You." Sensing killing intent from Xue Chen's eyes, the boss of the assassins knew that he might really be killed if he were to continue challenging Xue Chen's bottom line. Thus, he picked up the card and departed into the dark night. "Teacher, Dan Xiaotian isn't dead yet. What should we do?" Xue Qin asked anxiously. "Those bunch of useless trash. The only reason why I turned to them is just so to avoid any complications." Xue Chen harumphed coldly. "Let's return back to the City Lord Manor first. Don't worry, I have an idea in mind. That fellow will never become a stumbling stone in your path. If all goes well, you might even be able to build up your reputation in the city." The more the boss of the assassins thought about the matter, the more furious he felt. If not for his greed, he wouldn't have suffered such a heavy loss, such that only he was left of his entire group. Clenching his fists in fury, he quickly flitted his way back to his den, but just when he had barely arrived at the entrance, a voice suddenly echoed from the dark woods around him. "After the deaths of so many of your brothers, you are willing to be sent off with just 500 ethereal coins? Who is it?" The boss of the assassins immediately drew his saber and scanned his surroundings. However, no matter how he searched, there was no one in sight. "Who are you? Come out. Don't think that you can scare me just like that. Such ploys wouldn't work on me, Cao Chengli. Don't bother searching. I'm on the tree branch right in front of you," the voice continued. Cao Chengli quickly raised his head, and through the dim illumination of the moonlight, he could vaguely see a book shaking its body, as if it had been possessed by a demon. The voice had come from the book. Why you? You are talking to me?" Cao Chengli's teeth clattered against one another. How could he possibly not be frightened? On this single night, he saw arrows bending mysteriously away from their targets, a horse who could kill, and a carriage executing martial arts. He was thinking of having a good sleep and forget all of the nightmares he had just been through, but a talking book actually appeared before him at this moment. Indeed, the book replied calmly. "Who are you? Who sent you here? Don't think that you'll get away with following me. I'll be taking your life right here and right now." Cao Chengli roared with gusto, but he tossed his saber away and ran the opposite direction away. He couldn't care that much anymore. What was important right now was for him to get away. Peng! But before he could get far, he suddenly stumbled on something and fell flatly to the ground. While he was scrambling to his feet, he saw that the book that was on the tree a moment ago was already right in front of him, and his body froze in despair. "If you wish to die a premature death, be my guest. Run away then. I'll make sure to send you off with my utmost sincerity." As the book spoke, a heavy pressure suddenly burst forth from the book, leaving Cao Chengli feeling as if he was plunged into freezing water. His body trembled as he quickly replied through quivering lips, "No, oh of course not." He instinctively realized that the book before him wielded powers comparable to the strongest ancient sages. It was at dimension shatter a realm. This realization made him resigned to his plight. He knew that no matter what means he utilized today, there was no way he would be able to get away from the book. "Good boy," the book complimented. "Those people you have just met, they hid crucial intelligence from you and caused you to suffer heavy losses. Do you not desire vengeance?" "Oh, of course I do. If I could, I would have ripped them into shreds." Cao Chunli's face warped in anger. "At the very least, you should know their identities if you desire vengeance." "Do you know who they are?" the book asked. This. Cao Chunli was stunned. When he received this request, the client had demanded his identity to be kept anonymous, and he was fine with it as long as the money reached his hands. Thus, he didn't probe deeper into the identity of his client. They shouldn't have gotten too far away yet. "Follow them," the book instructed. As the leader of a band of bandits, something as elementary as tracking someone shouldn't be too much of a problem for you, right? "I understand." Cao Chunli nodded. Those words affirmed his doubt that the book, just like the earlier horse and carriage, had come from Dan Xiaotian. Most likely, the reason why Dan Xiaotian hadn't claimed his life yet was because the other party thought that there was still some value to be squeezed out of him. "Move on then," the book ordered. Gritting his teeth, Cao Chunli quickly returned to where the bonfire was. Even though his cultivation was way beneath Xue Chen and the others, as someone who thrived off plundering, he was skilled at concealment and tracking. It didn't take him too long before he was standing before a majestic manor. "This is the City Lord Manor." "It's the City Lord Manor who commissioned the assassination request." Cao Chunli widened his eyes in disbelief. The Lord of Shenjiang City, Xue Yang, was well respected in the region. He was known to be impartial and righteous. How could the other party possibly engage in something as vile as commissioning an assassination? Alarmed, Cao Chunli quickly moved to the edge of the wall and leaped in stealthily. He got into a courtyard and saw a large group of people assembled together. The two figures he had met a moment earlier were standing in front of the group. Controlling his breathing carefully, Cao Chunli made sure to erase every trace of his presence. The one standing at the forefront of the group was a soldier dressed in magnificent armor. Judging from their appearance, it was clear that they were the elites of the City Lord Manor. "Swap into the clothes of these men and get rid of Dan Xiaotian. I don't wish to see that man breathing by dawn, understood?" The deep voice of the middle-aged man resounded across the courtyard as he gestured to a bundle of black clothes placed by the side. "Yes, sir." The soldiers swiftly took off their armor and donned those black clothes. Taking a closer look, Cao Chunli nearly fainted on the spot. Those were the attire of his bandit band. The elites of the City Lord Manor were actually going to pass off as them to kill Dan Xiaotian. He would never dare believe this if he hadn't witnessed it with his own eyes. Just what kind of grudge does the City Lord Manor has with Dan Xiaotian to go this far? Cao Chunli thought as he wisely made the decision to record the sight before him with a record crystal. Very soon, the disguised soldiers of the City Lord Manor were already sprinting their way over to the Dan clan residence. It didn't take long for them to surround the area. "We'll charge in together. Spare no one at all," the leader of the soldiers commanded with a suppressed voice. "Yes, sir." At the command of the leader, the soldiers dashed right into the residence. Cao Chunli carefully climbed onto one of the lush trees outside and looked at the happenings in the residence through the dim moonlight. What he was going to see would be one of the most unforgettable sights in his life. A young man was standing firmly at the center of his residence with a sword in his hand. Each time he flicked his wrist, a head would roll to the ground. The wind roared endlessly within the confines of the courtyard, and it felt like this force wouldn't die down until every single one of the trespassers dropped dead. In less than 3 minutes, the 50 elites dispatched by the City Lord Manor were already cold, hard corpses. "That person is Dan Xiaotian. He's supposed to be the weakling that I have to kill." Cao Chunli's face paled as his heart beat so swiftly that it felt as if it would leap out of his chest. "Damn those bastards from the City Lord Manor. They are trying to get me killed." It was fortunate that the ones who had made a move on him earlier were the horse and the carriage. If he had to face Dan Xiaotian personally, His head would have also been severed from his neck in a heartbeat. The young man's swordsmanship had already reached an unfathomable level where even a simple slash carried profound intents. He had never witnessed such a terrifying technique in his entire lifetime. Teacher. After slaying everyone, the young man, Dan Xiaotian, walked into the room with an incredulous look on his face, as if he couldn't believe that he was the one who had massacred so many soldiers. It was also only then did Cao Chengli realize that there was a young man sitting in front of one of the rooms all along, spectating the battle. He actually didn't notice the young man's presence from the very start till now. This young man appeared to be in his early 20s, and he had a graceful demeanor. In the face of Dan Xiaotian's presence, the young man put down his teacup calmly before a disapproving frown made its way to his forehead. Just these few opponents, and you actually took more than 2 minutes to deal with them. That's 3 breaths for every single one of them. If this is all that you got, how am I supposed to impart even more advanced swordsmanship to you? You won't be able to make it at this rate. Tonight, you shall be practicing your sword out here till daybreak, understood? Understood. The young man lowered his head in shame. Dan Xiaotian killed a person every 3 breaths, but he is still getting punished for that. Cao Chengli nearly choked on his saliva. He had seen plenty of geniuses, and Dan Xiaotian definitely ranked at the top of his list. Yet, his teacher was still unhappy with his performance. Wasn't this teacher a little too harsh? That wasn't all though. While Cao Chengli was still trying to digest all that had happened earlier, he saw the horse, which had destroyed his subordinates earlier, galloping over to the young man's side. With a bright smile on its horse lips, it picked up the teapot and refilled the young man's teacup. After which, it even lifted up its hooves and carefully wiped them clean before massaging the young man's back. Cao Chengli felt as if his rationality was being challenged right here. Could that being over there really still be considered as a horse? Was this how a horse was supposed to act? I must never come to the Dan clan ever again. Never ever. Cao Chengli made this spontaneous decision in his mind as he turned around to leave the area. But at this moment, a voice sounded in his ears, "You know what you have to do." This voice was gentle and soothing, but it left goosebumps rising all over his body. He quickly turned around to look back into the Dan clan residence, and he saw the young man sipping on his tea looking in his direction with a slight smile on his lips. It was as if the other party had peered through the concealment of the darkness to look right at him. Ai. Cao Chengli found himself falling into incoherency at this abrupt happening. You just have to recount what you have seen today. The young man's lips didn't move at all, but his voice echoed clearly in his ears. I understand. Cao Chengli replied with a deep bow. You have directed malevolent intentions toward me earlier. On the account that you have done it under another man's bidding, I'll overlook it this once and spare you. However, be warned that I will not be so courteous if you dare harm the life of another man with those filthy hands of yours. I'll be watching you, the young man said before his voice trailed off. Why yes, Cao Chengli replied before fleeing as quickly as he could. Chapter 1931. Entering the ethereal hall once more, watching Cao Chengli's frantically escaping silhouette, Zhongxian smiled quietly for a moment before rising to his feet and flinging his sleeves. Hula! All of the corpses lying around the residence burst into flames. In just a moment's time, they were all reduced to ashes. With another fling of Zhongxian's hands, all of the ashes flowed into the underground drainage and vanished from sight. All traces of the battle that had gone on earlier vanished entirely, as if nothing had happened at all. Zhongxian walked into the room and sat down to meditate so as to replenish the zhenqi in his body. He had to say that the medicinal water from boiling the dongshu gourd was really effective. Not only had he recovered from his injuries, his body had also managed to adapt to the space and spiritual energy in the azure, allowing him to move and absorb spiritual energy more easily. He cultivated for roughly 2 hours before finally coming to a halt. He pondered quietly for a short moment before directing his consciousness toward his dantian and asking, "Gourd, what the hell are you?" This question had bugged him for quite a while now. He was well aware of how severe his injuries were, but just drinking the medicinal water from the dongshu gourd allowed him to make a swift recovery. Most likely, The Dongshu Gourd was a being more fearsome than he had ever imagined. Thinking back, it was worth wondering why ancient sage Chiu Wu would set up a spatial formation just to nourish a Dongshu Gourd for tens and thousands of years. Most likely, there was more than meets the eye. There is a lot more stuff that I can eat here. As long as you can give me enough food, you'll know in due time. The Dongshu Gourd readjusted its position to find a comfortable spot before lying down leisurely. Zhong Xian tried asking a few more questions, but the latter simply ignored him. Sighing deeply, he took out his ethereal token and immersed his consciousness in it once more. Why aren't they back yet? In the City Lord Manor, Xue Chen was pacing around with a tight frown on his forehead. Under normal circumstances, the elites he had dispatched should have already killed that trash and returned by now. 2 hours had passed since then, so why were there no one to be seen? You, head over to take a look. Xue Chen turned to a nearby guard and ordered. The guard swiftly put on a set of dark clothes and flitted away. Soon, he returned with a bizarre look on his face. Sir, nothing seems to have happened to the Dan clan at all. Dan Xiaotian and Dan Yi are completely unharmed. Xue Chen was bewildered by the report. How can that be? Are my commands not clear? He had instructed the guards to eliminate those 3 at the Dan clan residence in the swiftest time possible, but nothing had happened even after 2 hours had passed. What was going on here? Investigate the matter. Find out where did the earlier team go to. Xue Chen bellowed furiously. The guard hurriedly rushed out, and an hour later, he returned and reported, based on the footsteps, all of them have entered the Dan clan. However, there are no traces that they have left the premises. My guess is that they might have been killed, and their corpses have been disposed of too. They have been killed? By those 3? Xue Chen was stunned. Those 50 elites he had dispatched were all Great Sage 1 Dan cultivators, and the leader was even at Great Sage 2 Dan. Their combined strength would make them a match even for a Great Sage 4 Dan cultivator. Yet, they were defeated silently like that, such that none of them even got to send a message back. Given that the opponent was just the crippled Dan Xiaotian, weakling Dan Yi, and a severely wounded young man, this shouldn't have happened. Or, could it be that the bandit was right? Xue Chen suddenly remembered Cao Chengli's words. The latter mentioned that Dan Xiaotian had a formidable horse and a carriage that could use martial arts. Could, by any chance, those 2 actually existed? Sir, what do we do now? Shall we continue dispatching people over? The guard asked. There's no need for that. If the guards were really killed by them, their guard must be up by now. For the time being, we need to gather more information and reassess Dan Xiaotian's strength before making a move. Xue Chen shook his head and said. Besides, the sun is about to be up soon. If we make a commotion now, we would risk sullying the City Lord residence's reputation. But, are we going to let that bastard off after so many of our brothers have been killed? The guard asked anxiously. The City Lord Manor might be rich, but grooming 50 guards like that took up a great deal of effort and resources too. For all of them to be killed just like that, this was really a little hard to swallow. With a livid look on Xue Chen's face, he said, I want you to take a trip to Hongyang Market and check plausible ambush points along the way. Try to find the corpses of the bandits or signs of battle. Yes, sir, the guard replied before leaving the room. A while later, he returned and reported, Sir, in the frontmost alley near Hongyang Market, we found some corpses, bows, and arrows. They belong to the deceased bandits. Good. Get your men to get rid of the corpses of those bandits. After which, I want you to smear some armor with blood and secretly bury them in places near the Dan clan residence. Xue Chen harumphed as a cold smile crept onto his lips. Sir, you want me to bury our weapon and armor around the Dan clan residence? Seeing that the guard was confused by the order, a glint flickered across Xue Chen's eyes as he explained, Dan Xiaotian has always been a weakling, and there's no one in town who doesn't know that. If it were to be found that many guards of the City Lord Manor has disappeared overnight, and the weapons and armor of both bandits and guards alike were found near the perimeter of the Dan clan residence, what do you think people will say? What people will say? They will probably say that Dan Xiaotian has colluded with bandits to kill the guards of the City Lord Manor. As the guard spoke, His eyes slowly lit up in excitement. If they were to do so, even without making a move on Dan Xiaoqian straight, they would be able to corner him and force him to submit to them. If things go well, not only would they be able to sully Dan Xiaoqian's reputation, they might even be able to push for his execution. Due to the evil committed by the bandits over the past decade, they were a bunch deeply abhorred by the ordinary civilians. If people were to learn that Dan Xiaoqian had colluded with the bandits, he would surely be condemned for it. And that would give the City Lord Manor a legitimate excuse to reject the marriage agreement. After all, how could the noble City Lord allow his own daughter to marry a person with questionable morals? That's right. I want you to spread the news tomorrow morning, saying that 50 of our guards have found traces of the bandits and had set forth to take them down. However, they went missing in the midst of the operation, so we are going to launch a citywide search for their whereabouts. Make sure to hype the matter up as much as possible. It would be best if the entire city learns of the matter, Xue Chen instructed with a smile. When the news has finally ripened enough, we'll head to the Dan clan and search their premises under the pretext of investigating the whereabouts of the missing guards. There, we'll find the weapons of the bandits and the blooded armor of our guards. There's no way Dan Xiaoqian will be able to free himself from this. Yes, sir. Hearing how Xue Chen was able to make such an ingenious move despite the disadvantageous situation they were in, the guard bowed deeply out of admiration. He pondered over the plan for a moment before asking, "But sir, what if Dan Xiaoqian refuses to plead guilty to it even with those evidence in place?" With chilling eyes, Xue Chen said, "He can deny it all he wants, but it will all be futile. As long as we can find a reason to drag him to the City Lord Manor, he'll be ours to deal with. We can simply pin whatever crime we want on him and sentence him accordingly." "That's true." The guard nodded. "I'll go make the arrangements right now. Second young mistress, you were looking for me?" While Xue Chen was arranging for Dan Xiaoqian's downfall, Xue Qin had returned to her bedroom, but she was unable to fall asleep. Eventually, she called for one of the youths serving by Hu Jianghe's side to come into her room. This young man was from the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion as well, and just like her, he was a menial disciple. He was in charge of attending of Hu Jianghe's needs so that the latter can focus his attention on cultivating. "This money is a token of my goodwill. Please, accept it," Xue Chen said politely. With a wave of her hand, a maid quickly passed a sachet of gold coins over. Before passing the sachet over, the maid casually shook the sachet a little, and the resounding jingling of coins echoed in the air. From the looks of it, it appeared that there were at least 100 coins inside. "We are all from the same sect. Second young mistress, there's no need to stand on ceremony." The young man's eyes lit up as he kept the sachet. A menial disciple like him wasn't entitled to a lot of resources in the Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion, so naturally, he was more than delighted to accept Xue Chen's generous gift. "May I ask you if Senior Hua has said after returning back to his quarters at night?" Xue Qin looked at the young man intently and asked. Senior Hua didn't say anything. Perhaps it was due to his inexperience. It was only at this moment that the young man finally understood Xue Qin's true intentions. He pondered for a brief moment before adding, "Right, he told us to keep a lookout for a person called World's Edge in the Ethereal Hall. He sternly instructed us to inform him as soon as that person appears." "World's Edge?" Xue Qin frowned. "It's like this." The young man swiftly filled Xue Qin in on what had happened in the Ethereal Hall. "I see. If World's Edge really appears, I would like to trouble Senior to inform me in advance. I would like to be the one to deliver their news to Senior Hua," Xue Qin said as she passed another sachet of gold coins over. "Of course, that isn't a problem at all," the young man nodded vehemently with light gleaming from his eyes. In the first place, this matter was nothing to him at all. If he could benefit from this so easily, there was no reason for him to take up Xue Qin's arrangements. Barely after saying those words, the young man suddenly lowered his head and took out a jade token. He took a look at it, and his eyes lit up. "Second young mistress, you are truly lucky. World's Edge has just entered the Ethereal Hall. Let's go look for Senior Hua together." "Yes." Xue Qin quickly got to her feet and followed the young man into Hu Jianghe's residence. It didn't take too long for them to arrive at their destination. "His there." Hearing their report, Hu Jianghe narrowed his eyes. "Senior, this is an ethereal token from Starlight City." Xue Qin quickly presented 2 ethereal tokens over. As valuable as ethereal tokens were, it was a common commodity to the City Lord Manor. UN. Seeing that the young lady was on the ball, Hu Jianghe nodded in approval before rising to his feet and saying, "Enter the ethereal hall with me. I'll show you what the true swordsmanship of our Ascendant Cloud Sword Pavilion looks like." "Thank you, Senior." Seeing that the other party didn't blame her for what happened earlier in the day, Xue Qin heaved a sigh of relief before immersing her consciousness into the ethereal token. Wang. The 2 of them entered the ethereal hall simultaneously. "It really is inconvenient bringing things around with me like that. Let's see if I can purchase a storage ring here." Too used to using storage rings in the master-teacher continent, he felt that it was a handful to lug his possessions with him around everywhere. Thus, he returned to the ethereal hall in hopes of finding a storage ring here. While it was late at night outside, the ethereal hall was filled to the brim with people. Furthermore, the surroundings remained extremely bright, as if the concept of day and night didn't exist here. Zhong Xian made his way over to the front receptionist and posed his question. "Of course, there are storage rings on sale in the ethereal hall too. Each of them costs 500,000 ethereal coins," the attendant replied cheerfully. 500,000 ethereal coins? Zhong Xian's eyebrows shot up. That was exorbitant. It was no wonder why even a huge clan like the Dan clan didn't have a single storage ring with them. "I won 8 matches earlier in the day. If I were to join the dueling ring now, will I continue on from the 9th match, or will I be starting over from the 1st? Zhong Xian asked. Currently, the dueling ring was the fastest way to earn ethereal coins that he knew of. However, he had left halfway through, so if the count were to start again from the 1st round, it would really be a huge pain for him. It was likely that no one would want to challenge him anymore by the time he reached the 8th round again. After all, the Starlight City only had that much experts. There weren't too many people who were willing to spend money just to lose a battle. Since you have won 8 matches, participating in the primary level duels don't pose too much of a challenge to you anymore. Unfortunately, there are no more matches for the intermediate level duels yet, and the earliest one would be 2 days away from now. Furthermore, it seems like your tier isn't high enough yet too. The attendant assessed Zhong Xian's profile for a moment as he remarked. Intermediate level duels? Zhong Xian was stunned. Primary and intermediate. Were there different tiers to the dueling ring too? You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.